Chapter 151. I've troubled the chief. Heh, it's getting late. Why don't you rest here tonight? I've prepared a special program for you. Calvert chuckled. Another chant rang out as bone arrows filled the air, surging into the midst of the officers and causing them to cry out in pain. Suddenly, numerous skeletal, zombie, and ghouls appeared in the blink of an eye, as well as the howling gargoyles and hate warriors, charging towards the officers. Hide in a tree and wait. When I make the first move, seize the opportunity and attack Clark. Lucky instructed as he crouched on a wall on the side of the street like a gecko, matching the color of the night. Since Clark was about to leave, Warren changed his strategy and decided to make his move on the road. They would definitely pass through a street after leaving Calvert's house. There were all sorts of buildings and a few lush trees around the street. It was a good place to make a move. Although Han Shua hadn't fully mastered the art of the demonic ninth heavens yet, simple flight wasn't a problem. It was because of this art that Han Shua was able to grow wings and fly out of the encirclement of the soldiers. Suddenly, a series of crackling sounds rang out from the bottom of the carriage. The carriage split into pieces in an instant, with splinters mixed with sand flying everywhere. The milky white sword light burst out 2 meters and blossomed from the broken carriage. The bursting sword light was like a hedgehog covered with spikes, and Lucky was like a hedgehog wrapped in the sword light. No, thank you, Uncle, but there have been a few more strangers in Valent City recently. I have many things to do and won't be staying today. Clark stood up and seemed to want to leave. Uncle Calvert, Lawrence's identity isn't that simple. You must be on your guard. My father will send someone to protect you in secret in 2 days. Clark warned Calvert. Oh, my gosh. It's actually an archmage necromancer. Calvert suddenly cried out in surprise and yelled out loudly. Han Shua nodded and didn't say anything else. He leapt into the air and landed on a roof. When he looked down, he discovered that Lucky had miraculously disappeared without a trace. Han Shua stood up and shot a look at Lucky when his ears left the tiles. The two of them left without a sound and quickly moved outwards. There were many houses in the surroundings, but when Han Shua listened attentively, he discovered that there didn't seem to be anyone living in the houses. He didn't know if they'd been arranged to leave beforehand. Han Shua was a bit regretful that he hadn't used his senses to scout the surroundings beforehand. He'd been too focused on killing Clark and hadn't paid attention to some details. After advancing to the true demon realm, Han Shua did indeed feel that his body was more flexible and useful than before. He could change his body into various states through his own adjustments. For example, it was very easy for him to conceal his presence like this. After a while, a carriage drove out from the direction of Calvert's house. The clattering of the carriage was quite ear-piercing in the silent night. The coachman was a sturdy guard. He waved the reins in his hand and spurred the running horses. When the carriage arrived at Lage's hiding place, a figure darted out from a hidden corner like lightning. It was as if he was weightless and stuck to the bottom of the carriage. Lucky's performance in this regard was quite satisfactory. He first crouched on the roof as soon as he entered Calvert's house and took a look at the layout of the entire building. He then pointed out the general purpose of each room to Han Shua, such as where the living room was, the master bedroom, and even the bathroom. He vaguely pointed them out to Han Shua. Just as Han Shua was worrying for Lucky, a figure used a levitation spell and quickly approached from the distance. The moon was covered by a cloud of black mist in the blink of an eye, and the already dim sky darkened in an instant. The figure extended a white bone staff from his wide sleeves as he approached. He waved his hand and chanted a spell in a low voice. Taking a deep breath, Han Shua stood in the distance and looked around. He discovered that there were close to 100 soldiers at Clark's place. These well-trained people were searching for Lucky from room to room. They gave up on the chase after Han Shua and focused all their attention on Lucky. Han Shua was startled as he looked at the necromancer that had appeared in the sky. He was stunned by this powerful necromancy magic. "We've been tricked. Retreat immediately." Han Shua suddenly called out lowly from the tree above and quickly jumped down from the lush foliage. At this moment, Han Shua's heart was actually calmer. He looked around coldly and discovered that there were suddenly a few more soldiers on the streets. These people were riding war horses and whizzing in his direction. There were even some who had drawn their longbows and were shooting at him from the roof. From the direction of Calvert's house, a calm and unruffled Clark walked out with a broad, middle-aged knight. Their gazes were fixed on Han Shuo as they spurred their warhorses to charge over. Because Clark might be in the hall, the two didn't dare act rashly. They lifted the roof tiles to observe and stuck their cheeks to the roof, trying to hear what was being said inside. In addition, Han Shuo discovered that the art of the demonic ninth heavens was much more skillful than the levitation spells that mages in this world could use when they reached the Archmage realm. When an Archmage cast the levitation spells, they couldn't compare to the agility and speed of Han Shuo's art of the demonic ninth heavens. Lucky changed into a grayish-brown robe. The color of his robe was the same as the color of the walls of the building. When he slowly walked along the wall, no one would be able to detect anything out of the ordinary even under the bright moonlight. It looked like Lucky had a very detailed understanding of the various styles of buildings. He must have spent a great deal of time and effort studying them. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to obtain so much information just by looking at the layout of the building. Han Shuo nimbly dodged the arrows when they came, and then discovered that even more soldiers were approaching. After thinking for a bit, Han Shuo deployed the art of the demonic ninth heavens, and his entire body suddenly flew into the air, shooting out like a hawk. All of this was clearly seen by Han Shuo from afar. When he saw the carriage quickly approach the large tree he was on, Han Shuo took a deep breath and focused his cold eyes, tightening his grip on the demon's lair edge. Lucky's expression was still calm as he looked around and said softly, "Let's split up and escape. We'll pass through the houses nearby." There was no way for Lucky to warn Han Shuo about the timing of his attack in advance. There was no way to teach Han Shuo the timing of his attack in the blink of an eye. Lucky could only let Han Shuo grasp it himself. Under Lucky's gaze, Han Shuo also took out a robe of similar color and put it on. He followed behind Lucky and approached the brightly lit roof of the hall. In the beginning, Han Shuo was quite surprised, thinking that Lucky had succeeded so quickly. When Han Shuo focused his attention on the corpse, he discovered that the person was completely unfamiliar and wasn't Clark at all. Messy footsteps quickly approached from all directions, immediately making Han Shuo realize the severity of the situation. As they slowly approached the hall, Han Shuo's breathing became long and steady, and his heartbeat suddenly slowed to match his breathing. Even the heat emanating from his body changed as he approached the roof of the hall. When they were about to reach the roof, if Han Shuo's entire body wasn't moving, he would have been mistaken for a tile on the roof. When the two flew to Calvert's house, Han Shuo finally recognized the old assassin Lucky's expertise. A qualified assassin would always maintain a low profile before making a move to assassinate the target. Only at the moment of making a move could the other party sense his presence. Let's do this. Be careful for now. Lawrence seems to have appeared in Valence City. He may come looking for trouble with you." Clark's voice sounded, reminding Calvert to be careful. Lawrence is only the son of the Empire's finance minister. Isn't he just throwing his life away by coming to Valence City to deal with me? Calvert didn't mind as he laughed loudly like a great bell. Lucky had taken a pill, but his body still couldn't reach the level of stealth that Han Shuo had. When they finally reached the roof, Lucky looked incredulously at Han Shuo, very surprised at Han Shuo's extraordinary control over his body. It was only now that Han Shuo discovered that Lucky was also an assassin with the strength of a swordmaster. A milky white light flashed through the air, disappearing in the blink of an eye as if it had never appeared. An intact carriage was instantly smashed into pieces, and the person inside died on the spot with bloody holes all over his body. The coachman in the front ran for his life. Numerous arrows whistled through the air, but Han Shuo used the demon's lair edge to break through them. He'd flown out of the encirclement in the blink of an eye and landed on a large tree in the distance. Chapter 152. Necromancers were rare to begin with, and Archmage-level necromancers were even rarer. Therefore, the appearance of this necromancer immediately caused many gasps of surprise. Han Shuo had just used the art of the demonic ninth heavens to escape from that area when he suddenly discovered this change. He hesitated for a moment and weaved through the surrounding rooftops, retreating back the way he'd come. When this necromancer had appeared, he'd used necromancy summoning to summon many dark creatures from another dimension. The appearance of these dark creatures greatly affected the soldiers chasing after Lucky, especially the enormous hate warriors and the group of gargoyles flying through the air. The enormous and shockingly strong hate warriors could smash a soldier into meat paste with a swing of an enormous metal rod. The agile gargoyles' metal claws whistled through the air and were also a great threat. "Damn it, I'll go kill him," Clark roared angrily as he whipped the reins and the warhorse beneath him charged forward. A long spear appeared in his hand as he charged in the direction of the necromancer. Under the ferocious gallop of the warhorse and the charge of the shining spear, the skeletal and zombie warriors in the way were unable to obstruct him at all. Knights could increase their own strength by a level with the charging force of their warhorse. Therefore, the scattered dark creatures were unable to stop Clark at all when he and his warhorse charged forward as one. At this time, because the Archmage-level necromancer had appeared, the surrounding soldiers were busy dealing with the summoned creatures and were unable to provide any effective assistance to Clark. Adept Knight Calvert remained where he was, directing the movements of the soldiers. When these well-trained soldiers had calmed down and formed teams to deal with the dark creatures, the rows of skeletal and zombie warriors were the first to fall. Although this Archmage-level necromancer had enormous mental strength, the number of dark creatures he could summon couldn't compare to the number of soldiers here. In particular, some of the ghouls and skeletal warriors were of limited use and were often destroyed by a single thrust from the Griffin Legion soldiers. However, the enormous hate warriors and the gargoyles howling in the darkness were still quite ferocious. They'd killed quite a few soldiers in a short while. It was a pity that there were only 5 hate warriors and 6 or 7 gargoyles. Under the volley of arrows from the archers, a few gargoyles were hit. Then, each hate warrior was surrounded by 10 or so Griffin Legion soldiers. A low groan sounded from the necromancer's mouth as 2 of the fallen hate warriors suddenly exploded. The appearance of the 2 corpse explosion spells instantly caused a dozen or so Griffin Legion soldiers to die with ghastly screams. By the time the necromancer was about to continue chanting another spell, Clark had already rushed in front of him on his warhorse. The silver spear in his hand suddenly lit up with a milky white sword light. Using the momentum of his warhorse, Clark flew up with his spear, stabbing towards the necromancer who was floating in the air with the levitation spell like lightning. Enormous white bones suddenly appeared in midair and formed a white bone shield with miraculous speed. The white bone shield was 3 meters tall and 2 meters wide, completely blocking the necromancer within. The white bones sparkled with a wondrous light and didn't leave the slightest gap when assembled. Some of the sharp bone fragments formed barbs in front of the shield, looking quite peculiar. With a crack, Clark's attack, infused with his ferocious momentum, suddenly smashed onto the white bone shield. Even such a high-level white bone shield was accompanied by cracking sounds as it shattered under Clark's wave of violent attacks. Bone powder flew everywhere where the spear pierced through the smooth and large white bones. With a muffled groan, the necromancer drifted back like a ghost. It looked like he'd realized that Clark wasn't easy to deal with and planned on putting some distance between them first. Clark's body landed on a roof after his charge ended. He sheathed his spear and swapped it for a long sword. He quickly weaved through the roofs and fixed his eyes on the necromancer as he chased after him. Another dark mist was released, and the body of the necromancer who just retreated flashed through the mist, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. 3 bone spears pierced through the air at the same time, aiming straight for Clark. Clark was finally able to determine the necromancer's location after the 3 bone spears appeared. At the same time, the sharp-eyed Han Shuo saw a protruding stone-like object move slightly on the roof Clark was on. This made Han Shuo's heart skip a beat as his body abruptly stopped, and he hid on another roof. However, the Demon's Lair edge had already silently approached Clark according to his thoughts. Snorting coldly, Clark didn't stop his charge, but suddenly changed directions midway. The long sword in his hand suddenly flickered and broke the bone spear that he hadn't been able to dodge. At this moment, Clark's figure finally neared the protruding stone-like object. The originally motionless object suddenly shot out a ray of cold light, and then Lucky's body, which was covered by a grayish-brown robe, appeared at the same time. Clark hadn't anticipated such a sudden attack when he'd just broken through the necromancer's bone spear. He'd only gathered half of his fighting aura when he immediately raised his sword to block the attack. The sound of metal clashing resounded through the night sky as Clark's body was involuntarily flung down from the roof. In the middle of Clark's descent, a sharp whistle suddenly sounded. A thin and long purple flame appeared out of thin air and bombarded Clark's lower back. The purple flame entered Clark's lower back and disappeared into his body in an instant. A ghastly howl suddenly sounded from Clark's mouth. When Clark's body landed on the ground, his entire body suddenly ignited with purple flames. Han Shua's figure bizarrely flew in front of Clark and looked coldly at Clark, who was being burned by the purple flames. With a mental summon, the demon's lair edge broke out of Clark's chest and landed in Han Shua's palm without a single drop of blood. It's you. Clark, whose internal organs had all been invaded by the cold and his body had also been rapidly damaged by the demon's lair edge, spat out these words with difficulty when he saw Han Shua reveal himself and pull off his mask. His teeth chattered and his face was full of disbelief. That's right, it's me. You've tried to kill me twice and failed, but I only need one chance to kill you. Han Shua said callously as he waved his right hand and circulated the mystical glacial spellfire. A red flame landed on Clark's body. Clark, who had already been invaded by the cold and was about to die, was burned again by the spellfire and turned into a puddle of blood in an instant. The speed of the spellfire was unbelievable. 3 bone spears appeared out of thin air and aimed straight at Han Shua. The whistling sound startled Han Shua. He leapt up and slashed with the demon's lair edge in his hand, cutting a bone spear in half. Han Shua yelled at Lucky in the distance. Damn it, why is he attacking me as well? I don't know him. Lucky replied as he dodged the attack with lightning speed. This was because the necromancer had also attacked Lucky, so it wasn't one of his own. Han Shua was startled and abruptly dodged. When the necromancer saw Han Shua escape, he actually began to tangle with Han Shua and relentlessly chased after Han Shua. This necromancer's appearance was a bit strange, and he wasn't on Lawrence's side. This made Han Shua feel quite puzzled, and he didn't know which side the necromancer belonged to. Now that Clark was dead, Han Shua saw that Lucky had concealed his figure and was heading in Calvert's direction. It looked like he was planning on finishing off Calvert as well. Han Shua didn't know anything about his counterpart and didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he saw that his counterpart had set his sights on him. He didn't plan on tangling with the necromancer any longer and fled outside as fast as he could. When Han Shua was a few hundred meters away from Calvert's house, Han Shua discovered Lawrence's carriage with his astonishing eyesight. Han Shua was overjoyed and quickly made his way to Lawrence's carriage. The necromancer's counterpart that was chasing Han Shua summoned a few gargoyles to follow Han Shua. Only when Han Shua appeared next to Lawrence's carriage did the necromancer and the gargoyles suddenly retreat. Brian, what's going on? Why didn't you send out any signals? But it's a mess over there again. Lawrence immediately poked his head out of the carriage when he saw Han Shua appear and asked anxiously to Han Shua, Don't mention it, tonight's events are a bit strange. Lucky and I don't know what's going on. We were mysteriously discovered and were almost caught by Clark. Then, an archmage necromancer suddenly appeared and attacked Clark and the others after he appeared. In the end, he attacked us as well. I really don't know what's going on. Han Shua complained. Then how's Uncle Lucky? Is Clark dead? Lawrence asked again. Mr. Lucky snuck towards Calvert and seemed to be planning on finishing him off. Clark's done for. You don't have to worry. Han Shua responded. Lawrence couldn't disguise the ecstasy on his face as he laughed heartily. Well done, well done. Valen City is about to descend into chaos. Chapter 153. Lawrence had a crazed expression on his face as he spoke, as if he wished for the world to be in chaos. This made Han Shua feel quite astonished. Brian, I'll be staying in Valen City for now. You can find me in the house you just came from if you need anything. Right? How do I contact you? Lawrence was in a good mood as he turned his head to look at Han Shuo. Musing for a moment, Han Shuo gave Lawrence the address of the hotel Emily was staying in and then quickly left, not caring about what happened afterwards. The hotel Emily was staying in wasn't a dark mantle stronghold, so Han Shuo wasn't afraid that Lawrence would find her. As Han Shuo was making his way back to the dark mantle stronghold, the sound of iron hooves rang out from Calvert's direction. It looked like Clark's death had indeed greatly affected the entirety of Valen City. Han Shuo didn't linger in this direction at this moment, nor did he care about whether Calvert had been assassinated by Lucky. He concealed his tracks and quickly made his way back to the Dark Mantle stronghold. Han Shuo easily found Emily after arriving at the Dark Mantle stronghold in Valen City. Waving her hands, Emily had Chester withdraw and then said to Han Shuo with a grave expression, "I know Lawrence's identity. She was indeed worthy of being a senior executive of the Dark Mantle." Han Shuo looked joyfully at Emily and asked in high spirits, "That's great. Just what is that kid's background? His status seems to be quite high." "Oh, if you interact with him in the future, pay attention to what you say and how you address him. This person may have a great influence on you." Emily glared unhappily at Han Shuo and then chanted a dark magic spell in a low voice. A boundary suddenly formed in the room and enveloped Han Shuo and Emily within. "With this boundary, the members outside won't be able to hear what I'm going to say next," Emily said gravely. Han Shuo was quite surprised to see Emily act so cautiously and hurriedly asked, "All right, don't keep me in suspense. Just what is Lawrence's identity?" Taking a deep breath, Emily sighed and said in a low voice, "He should be His Royal Highness the Third Prince." Startled, Han Shuo looked at Emily with a bit of disbelief. He then shook his head and said with a smile, "You're not joking, are you? Every citizen of the Lancelot Empire knows very well that His Majesty only has 2 sons. How could there be a third prince? In addition, everyone knows that Lawrence is the son of the finance minister of the Empire. How could he be the third prince?" "I'm telling the truth." Emily couldn't help but reach out and pinch Han Shuo when she saw that Han Shuo didn't quite believe her. She then explained, "This matter is a scandal in the royal family. The finance minister, EV, has some problems in that area and has married a beautiful wife, Alice. He can only look at her and not touch her." Seeing Han Shuo take a deep breath and his eyes continuously twinkle, Emily understood that her words had greatly affected Han Shuo. Seeing that Han Shuo was deep in thought, Emily didn't open her mouth to disturb Han Shuo. She only stood there and looked at Han Shuo, waiting for Han Shuo to sort out his own thoughts. After a while, Han Shuo nodded and smiled at Emily. "All right, I understand. Don't worry. I know how to handle my relationship with Lawrence. Our Dark Mantle has never interfered with complicated internal affairs of the royal family. We only listen to His Majesty's orders. Before the situation is clear and His Majesty has given a definite indication, we normally won't get involved. Candide, that old fox, was able to vaguely warn you after your first mission. This means that he thinks very highly of you. He has good intentions towards you. The more you know about these matters, the more disadvantageous it will be for you. It's because I understand you too well and know of your strength and ambitions that I'm telling you such confidential matters. However, it's still up to you to decide how to grasp and decide." Emily looked at Han Shuo and explained, "I know that you're doing this for my own good. Hehe, I know what to do. Oh, I forgot to tell you. I've already killed Clark. Valen City should be in chaos right now." Han Shuo smiled faintly at Emily. It was Emily's turn to be shocked when she heard these words. She looked incredulously at Han Shuo and asked with great surprise, What did you say? You said you killed Clark?" Nodding, Han Shuo said with certainty, "Correct, I did kill Clark, but someone helped me in the middle. In addition, I only managed to do it because of a sneak attack. Don't be too surprised." Exhaling lightly, Emily was still quite astonished. She shook her head. "We've investigated Clark's strength. He's absolutely an Earth Knight. He reached the strength of an Earth Knight at such a young age, and his potential is extraordinary. Who would have thought that you would ambush him and kill him like this? It looks like you're hiding a lot of things from me." "No, I'm really not hiding anything from you. Actually, An archmage necromancer appeared along the way and I, a fellow necromancer, helped us deal with Clark. We received great help from his strength, otherwise we wouldn't have been able to succeed at all. Han Shuo smiled wryly and briefly recounted what had happened to Emily. When Han Shuo had finished, Emily's expression became quite grave. She murmured, "Necromancers are already very rare, and archmage necromancers are even rarer. I really don't know which faction this necromancer belongs to." "I'll need you to investigate this," Han Shuo said with a smile. Come with me. We'll go find something." Emily thought for a moment and put on a fur coat from the side, asking Han Shuo to walk out with her. "What do we need to do?" Han Shuo walked up to Emily and gently tidied up the corners of Emily's clothes. Smiling charmingly at Han Shuo, Emily laughed naughtily like a little girl about to do something naughty. "Clark just died. Valen City must be in a state of chaos right now. The Griffin Legion must be in a frenzy right now, searching the entire city for traces of you. What we need to do is take advantage of the chaos and make things even more chaotic." "Heh, that's great. I've discovered that I like to do bad things. Perhaps I was a murderer and arsonist in my past life." Han Shuo smiled faintly. "You're also a very bad bastard in this life." Emily rolled her eyes at Han Shuo and removed the boundary, walking out with Han Shuo. Chapter 154. In the span of a few months, of Bob Asher's two sons, one had mysteriously disappeared, and the other had been killed on the streets. This was too much of a blow to him. Clark was his most valued son, the one he'd placed the most hope on. Now that he'd been killed in Valen City, he'd gone completely insane. That night in Valen City was destined to be a time of chaos. All of the Griffin Legion soldiers had been gathered and were going from house to house, searching for suspicious characters. Due to the chief's rage, the ordinary soldiers of the Griffin Legion were also in a bad temper. All unfamiliar merchants and adventurers who didn't cooperate in the slightest might face a vicious beating. The sound of hooves thundered through the streets, waking up the people who were sleeping in the middle of the night. Even the symbol of the Griffin Legion, a Griffin Legion, was hovering in the night sky above Valen City, making everyone feel as if they were facing a great enemy. They even thought that the Kasi Empire had invaded in the middle of the night. The Griffins were like black dots in the sky, their strange cries deafening to the ears. They flew from the west to the south, and then from the south to the north. Whenever they saw any strange movements below, they would land and move with the soldiers on the ground. So these are Griffins. They look quite large. Han Shuo stood behind a large tree on a street near Bob Asher's slave shop, murmuring to himself as he watched a pair of griffins fly past. Indeed, griffins are a very ferocious flying unit. A single griffin has the ability to tear apart ordinary magical creatures. This Griffin Legion is a very important reason why His Majesty thinks so highly of old Bob and doesn't dare to act rashly despite knowing that he has intentions of rebelling. Emily exhaled lightly and explained to Han Shuo, shivering a bit. It was a cold winter night, and some of the puddles on the streets had already formed thick blocks of ice. The ice needles hanging from the houses glinted coldly under the moonlight. As the cold wind blew, it was only natural that a mage like Emily would feel cold. Sucking in a breath of cold air, Han Shuo held Emily's tender little hand with his right hand and circulated his demonic yuan. Han Shuo's right hand was like a small stove, bringing warmth to Emily. "You're a necromancer, and at the same time, you've also trained in a special martial technique. But why are you still able to use fire magic? Moreover, you're using it so skillfully, as if you can adjust the temperature according to your will. How are you able to do it?" Emily's charming eyes sparkled as she stared at Han Shuo, rebuking Han Shuo. "Actually, this is one of the martial techniques that I practice. Don't be so surprised." Han Shuo shrugged his shoulders and explained to Emily honestly. It was a pity that Emily didn't believe Han Shuo's explanation in the slightest, but Emily didn't pursue the matter. She smiled faintly. All right, I'll discover all your secrets one day. Your mysteriousness is a kind of poison to me. I've discovered that the more I want to know everything about you, the more mysterious you become. Don't be love-struck. Let's go. Let's go. Han Shuo reached out with a smile and slapped Emily's round butt, urging Emily to walk faster. The two of them didn't bring Chester with them this time. When they arrived at the slave shop where Lisa had been auctioned off last time, Han Shuo released a dark mist magic and shrouded the surrounding walls in an even darker environment. Heh, your grasp of necromancy magic isn't bad now. Emily laughed lowly. As an archmage, she used the levitation spell and slowly rose into the air, landing on a 5-meter-tall wall. She spoke again. I'll wrap the rope inside. You can use it to climb over. Why go to so much trouble? Han Shuo laughed lowly, and his body abruptly shot through the air. His speed was faster and steadier than Emily's levitation spell, and he landed beside Emily in the blink of an eye. Her body suddenly froze in place, and Emily looked at Han Shuo as if she'd seen a ghost in broad daylight. Her beautiful eyes sparkled, and she threw herself into Han Shuo's arms, using all her strength to pound Han Shuo's chest. She cursed with a mixture of anger and joy. You annoying bastard. You've clearly reached the archmage level long ago, and you've been lying to me. I'll fight it out with you, you bastard. You bastard. When Han Shuo heard the strange sounds coming from afar, he didn't dare stay at a high place in case he attracted the attention of bystanders. He abruptly grabbed Emily and flew down, hiding in a corner of the slave trading house. He then grabbed Emily's little hand and explained with a rueful smile, I didn't lie to you. This flying method is similar to the levitation spell and is one of the martial arts techniques I've trained in. It has nothing to do with magic. Think carefully. Did you feel any magical pulses from my body just now? Emily started when she heard Han Shuo's words, and her long eyelashes fluttered in confusion. She then looked at Han Shuo in shock and asked incredulously, just what kind of martial arts technique are you training in? According to my understanding, even the strongest swordsman or sacred knight can only use fighting aura to fly into the air for a short period of time. That kind of martial arts technique can't even be called a flying technique. How can you do it? I've said before that the martial arts technique I train in is a bit more wondrous. It's hard for me to explain it to you. Han Shuo indeed couldn't say much about the training of magical arts and could only explain it to Emily this way. All right. I knew I wouldn't be able to get anything out of you. Let's go. Let's take advantage of the chaos in Valen City and see if we can get anything useful from this slave trading house. Emily rolled her eyes at Han Shuo in rebuke and tugged on Han Shuo's arm as they walked the familiar path towards the slave trading house. Emily must have carefully investigated this slave trading house beforehand and was very familiar with the buildings here. Her body floated in midair as she walked and didn't make a single sound. A layer of black magic as thin as a cicada's wings formed around her body, concealing the condition of her body. Han Shuo had long since become familiar with this kind of shady business. Not only did he not make a single sound, but he also used his extraordinary senses to continuously point the way for Emily, allowing the two to avoid the many guards patrolling along the way. After a while, the two passed through the two buildings of the auction house they'd passed last time and headed deeper into the back 3 buildings. This slave trading house usually has soldiers from the Griffin Legion stationed here. It'll be very difficult for us to leave once we've been discovered. However, because of Clark's death today, the soldiers inside will definitely be mobilized to conduct a manhunt for all of Valen City. This is the best opportunity for us. Emily explained to Han Shuo as they walked. Han Shuo became serious once they got down to business. He listened to Emily's words as he silently observed the surroundings. At this moment, an extremely odd smell surged into Han Shuo's nostrils. This smell was mixed with the smell of blood, and it was a bit pungent as Han Shuo slowly took in the air. Sniffing, Han Shuo reached out a hand to pull Emily and said lowly, "There's the smell of blood. Something doesn't seem right here either." "I don't think so." Emily sniffed hard and spoke with surprise. She thought for a moment and seemed to remember Han Shuo's miracles. She said, "See if you can find the direction the smell of blood is coming from." Nodding, Han Shuo said lowly, "Follow me." Grabbing Emily's little hand, Han Shuo used his nose to search for the direction of the smell of blood. He passed 2 buildings on the side and arrived next to a pond. There was a fake mountain next to the pond with several dark caves within. Han Shua's ears and nose were put to good use as he led Emily into one of the caves. A creaking sound suddenly rang out as the originally thick stone wall suddenly split apart. A terrified Imperial guard rushed out from within, his body covered in blood. He hadn't even taken a few steps when a bone spear suddenly appeared out of thin air and pierced through the Imperial guard's back. Two zombie warriors then walked out and dragged the Imperial guard's corpse inside. This scene was seen clearly by Han Shua and Emily, who had just entered and taken the opportunity to hide on the side. Han Shua stared blankly for a moment and suddenly said, "Perhaps the necromancer I saw today is inside right now." This is highly possible, but the owner of this slave shop is Bob Asher, and that necromancer is also one of Clark's killers. Why would he appear here? Emily was a bit puzzled as she conversed with Han Shua in a low voice. The most dangerous place is the safest place. The entire city is on high alert right now, and this slave shop is Bob Asher's property. Large amounts of soldiers have been deployed, so no one would have thought that he'd appear here. One of the guards was killed just now, which means that this necromancer isn't a customer here. It's very likely that he's here to hide. Han Shua thought for a moment and opened his mouth to speak slowly. What you say makes a lot of sense. Should we take a look then? Emily spoke approvingly and asked Han Shua for his opinion. Of course, I'm also quite curious about this necromancer. If I were to face him alone, I'd probably have no choice but to run. But now that you're here, we don't need to fear him. Han Shua opened his mouth to speak and paused. Han Shua listened attentively to the movements inside and said after a while, "All right, the footsteps of the zombie warriors have faded away. Let's go take a look." Chapter 155. The two saw corpses littering the ground as soon as they entered the cave. A rough estimate estimated that there were at least a few dozen bodies. Judging from the clothing on their bodies, there were guards from the slave shop, nobles who had come to choose their slaves, and even slaves who had been imprisoned in cages. Torches burned on the surrounding walls, illuminating the area. This place was most likely used to imprison slaves. There were many iron bars in the surroundings, and there were also some instruments of torture in the middle. It looked like they were used to discipline disobedient slaves. A high platform had been built with black stones in the center, and a corpse was tied to several pillars. There was a square groove about 3 meters wide in the center of the platform, and a strong stench of blood emanated from it. More than 10 zombie warriors were summoned and lifted the corpses on the ground, throwing them one by one into the pool of blood in the center of the platform. When the intact corpses fell into the pool of blood, they sank into it with a splash. The pool of blood then bubbled with a gurgling sound, calming down after a while as the water level in the pool rose a few notches. As more and more corpses were thrown into the pool of blood, more and more blood appeared in the pool, almost filling it to the brim. In the corner of the platform, the necromancer that Han Shua had seen last time was holding a white bone staff and revealing his appearance. His body was emaciated, and he was looking expressionlessly at the pool of blood. No signs of life could be seen in his grayish-brown eyes. Han Shua and Selena immediately retreated to a corner when they entered, only using the cracks in the corners to observe everything. Emily set up a soundproof boundary around the two and immediately said in a low voice, "It looks like this necromancer is setting up some sort of altar. I wonder what he's planning on doing?" Shaking his head, Han Shua's expression was grave as he said lowly, "I don't know if it's because I've grasped too little necromancy magic, but I don't know anything about this altar that the necromancer is setting up. It looks like an archmage necromancer has grasped many powerful necromancy spells indeed." As Han Shua and Emily spoke in low voices, the necromancer waved the white bone staff in his hand and chanted a spell in a low voice. The blood in the pool of blood on the altar suddenly began to swirl, and the corpses that had been tied to the pillars were instantly stripped of their flesh and blood, becoming a few sets of eerie white skeletons. Another spell of necromancy was chanted, and the souls on the ground that hadn't yet dispersed seemed to materialize as they transformed into clouds of grayish-brown smoke, surging into the pool of blood in the center of the altar. The blood in the blood pool formed a whirlpool, and the bones of the corpses that had just sunk to the bottom were revealed one by one. Then, these white bones slowly pieced together, gradually forming a three-eyed evil god with 8 horns on its head and a barbed tail at its waist. This three-eyed evil god was formed from white bones. Its 3 eyes were red, yellow, and blue, like triangles embedded on its forehead. When it was still forming, a vast and enormous evil presence spread from its body, filling the entire area with its evil presence. It was a kind of ruthless, murderous, and extremely bloodthirsty evil. Even from a great distance, Han Shuo felt a chill in his heart. His eyes abruptly locked onto the three-eyed evil god, not leaving it for even a second as he focused all of his attention on all of its movements. Oh my gosh, he's connected to the three-eyed evil god, Ansidezi, through the altar. Emily groaned in disbelief, her beautiful eyes filled with shock. Gods were powerful beings of legend, and they had the ability to penetrate the heavens and the earth. However, they were bound by the laws of the plane and couldn't reveal their true forms in this world. However, through some rituals and mediums, some people in this world could actually use profound secret techniques to communicate with the gods. All this time, Han Shuo had thought that this kind of unproven theory was very absurd and that it was something that couldn't possibly exist. But now that the truth was right in front of him, Han Shuo had no choice but to believe it. Seeing that they were separated by who knew how many planes of existence, the three-eyed evil god, Ansidezi, had used this necromancer's ritual to descend his consciousness onto the white skeleton. Han Shuo stood there in a daze, his thoughts a mess. A series of mysterious and ancient sounds came from the mouth of the three-eyed evil god. Han Shuo and Emily were both baffled and didn't know what this string of sounds meant. However, the skinny necromancer seemed to be able to communicate directly with him. The necromancer was prostrating on the ground, his head buried deep in his chest as he kowtowed. He suddenly lifted his head with a look of fear and trepidation, and then quickly chanted an incantation. The Life Scout necromancy magic was released, and it suddenly floated in all directions. Not good. When Han Shuo saw this magic appear, he immediately knew that he was in trouble. He suddenly gave a low cry and planned to pull Emily away from this place. Unfortunately, he was still a step too late. The Life Scout magic spread out in all directions and suddenly lit up when it neared where Han Shuo and Emily were. The face of the kneeling necromancer immediately darkened, and he suddenly waved his white-boned staff. The dozen or so zombie warriors that had stopped in the surroundings suddenly walked towards Han Shuo and Emily. "We've been exposed. We have to leave immediately," Emily shouted and suddenly retreated, planning to take Han Shuo and leave this place. At this moment, the sharp-eyed Han Shuo saw that because of the necromancer's distraction, the body of the three-eyed evil god, Ansidezi, that had just been formed from white bones, suddenly collapsed into the blood pool on the altar. It looked like the necromancer couldn't be distracted for even a moment in order to use the mysterious magic to use the blood and bones in the blood pool to communicate with the three-eyed evil god Ansidezi. If the necromancer was distracted to deal with Han Shuo and Emily, then Ansidezi, who had crossed who knew how many planes of existence to descend upon this place with his consciousness, wouldn't be able to use the blood and bones to appear. The three-eyed evil god Ansidezi can't help him. The two of us don't need to be afraid of him. Han Shuo's body paused, and he stopped at the entrance of the cave. He even grabbed Emily's retreating body with a backhand grip. Emily's beautiful eyes focused on the altar as soon as she heard Han Shuo's words. She also discovered that the three-eyed evil god had disappeared into the blood pool. She immediately calmed down and shouted, "Who are you to dare use such an evil ceremony to summon the three-eyed evil god Ansidezi in Valen City? The two of you shouldn't have barged in, otherwise I wouldn't have killed you." The skinny necromancer used a levitation spell to fly towards Han Shuo and Emily after saying these words in a hoarse voice. He waved the white-boned staff in his hand and released a high-level necromancy spell, Chains of the Grudge Spirits. Dozens of grudge spirits tangled together and formed a long metal chain that moved towards Han Shuo and Emily. The dozen or so zombie warriors also raised their wooden clubs and arrived in front of Han Shuo and Emily, immediately attacking Han Shuo and Emily. Emily snorted delicately and took out her magic staff. She chanted a dark magic spell, and a pitch-black death scythe suddenly took shape in the air. She pointed her magic staff at it, and it slashed towards the zombie warriors. The zombie warriors' bodies were as fragile as paper under the death scythe slashes. They were torn apart in an instant, and not a single one was able to get close to Han Shuo and Emily. As the chains of the grudge spirits wrapped around them, Han Shuo's Demon's Lair Edge suddenly whistled as he activated the mystical glacial spellfire, causing the Demon's Lair Edge to explode with blinding red light. The temperature of the entire space suddenly soared as the red spellfire enveloped the Demon's Lair Edge and burned fiercely, rapidly descending towards the chains of the grudge spirits. The chains of the grudge spirits, formed by dozens of grudge spirits, opened their mouths and screamed in terror under the scorching temperature of the Demon's Lair Edge's red world spellfire. When the Demon's Lair Edge whistled into the chains of the grudge spirits, the chains of the grudge spirits made squeaking sounds and gray smoke rose from it. Dozens of grudge spirits screamed as their souls were destroyed. 3 bone spears suddenly formed and abruptly pierced towards Han Shuo and Emily. Han Shuo used his mind to control the Demon's Lair Edge to block the 2 bone spears flying towards Emily. He also chanted a necromancy spell in a low voice, and a bone spear pierced through the air, accurately colliding with the other bone spear that was attacking him. Kid, you're also a necromancer." The skinny necromancer suddenly exclaimed in surprise and looked at Han Shuo with great surprise. "Heh. Indeed. We even joined hands to kill Clark when we were at Calvert's place just now. This is the second time we've met tonight." Han Shuo looked at the necromancer with a calm expression and smiled faintly. Last time at Calvert's house, Han Shuo had covered his face at first and had only taken off his mask when he killed Clark. When the necromancer had attacked Han Shuo, the two had been quite a distance apart. Because it had been the middle of the night, the necromancer hadn't clearly seen Han Shuo's face. It was obvious that Han Shuo hadn't recognized him this time. "So it's you," the necromancer exclaimed lowly and quickly floated towards Han Shuo again. He said darkly, "We're both necromancers. Let me see if you've understood the mysteries of necromancy." The necromancer attacked again after he'd finished speaking, looking like he wanted to kill off Han Shuo first. Chapter 156. I've only just started and was just about to ask for your guidance. Han Shuo wasn't afraid of him. There was also the dark archmage, Emily, by his side. With the 2 of them fighting him, they definitely wouldn't be at a disadvantage. Thus, when the necromancer floated over, Han Shuo didn't seem nervous at all. The necromancer's figure was as elusive as a ghost, constantly changing directions as he neared Han Shuo and Emily. When he was only 10 meters away from the 2, the archmage suddenly waved his white bone staff and chanted a necromancy incantation in a low voice. An evil knight with dark brown skin and a body covered in black metal armor was over 3 meters tall and was riding a howling beast that was even more robust than a wild rhinoceros. Its body was covered in brown scales, and it raised a spiked club that was as thick as a person. It urged the howling beast beneath it to charge viciously towards Han Shuo and Emily. Evil knights were dark creatures of a higher level than hate knights. Only archmage necromancers could summon them. They came from the dark abyss of another dimension, and the black metal armor on their bodies had excellent physical defense. Their ferocious strength combined with the howling beast's charge was a nightmare for anyone. As soon as the evil knight appeared, he urged the howling beast to charge at Han Shuo and Emily, raising his spiked club high above his head and smashing it down like an iron pillar. When Emily saw the evil knight appear, she immediately retreated without saying a word. She chanted a dark magic incantation in a low voice, and the enormous Grim Reaper's scythe, which had yet to disappear, once again slashed at the evil knight under Emily's control. After summoning the evil knight, the necromancer didn't take another step forward. Instead, he quickly dodged to the back, summoning a group of gargoyles to attack Han Shuo as he continued to fire bone spears in all directions. Compared to the fights between the students of the academy, this necromancer was obviously a veteran of 100 battles. He had a very accurate grasp of the timing of the battle. He had drifted towards Han Shua's group in order to summon the evil knight in front of them. He wanted to charge at them at close range so that they wouldn't have much of a chance to defend themselves. The Demon's Lair edge followed Han Shua's will and once again spiraled out, bringing with it the fiery red spell flames, shooting towards the group of attacking gargoyles. Han Shua chanted a bone shield spell and abruptly placed it in front of him, blocking the bone spear from piercing through. After blocking 2 attacks from the bone spears, the bone shield ran out of magic power and cracked. At this moment, Han Shua's mental strength quickly condensed and circulated, suddenly summoning the little skull. He even used his consciousness to tell the little skull to deal with the evil knight. After the evil knight had disappeared, Emily let out a light breath and calmed her tightly clenched heart. The Grim Reaper scythe had also disappeared along with it. The one that remained in place was still the little skull holding the bone dagger. Little Skull waved the bone dagger a bit, and the 7 bone spurs that had been scattered on the ground flew back to his back. At this time, the disdain on the necromancer's face had long since disappeared without a trace. He looked at Little Skull in disbelief and cried out in shock, "Impossible! Absolutely impossible! Not even 100 skeletal warriors could harm an evil knight. This goes against the common sense of necromancy." A calm smile still hung on his face as Han Shua said very casually, "Nothing is impossible. Although I don't grasp as much necromancy as you, I don't think there's anything that I can't understand." The bone dagger-wielding little skeleton's leg trembled as he gave the order. He'd already locked onto the necromancer and quickly flew towards the necromancer. He jumped in fright and then chuckled oddly, "Good, very good. Then let me see just what secrets you have." A necromancy incantation came out of his mouth, and he quickly approached Han Shua. Just as he was about to draw close to the little skull, the necromancer suddenly flew high into the air and threw out the white bone staff in his hand, suddenly covering Han Shua's head. In the blink of an eye, an enormous amount of evil mental strength surged into Han Shua's mind through the white bone staff. Like a magnet, it attempted to take over Han Shua's memories for itself. A proud smile appeared on the necromancer's face as he yelled darkly at the panicking Emily, "Don't act blindly without thinking. I've already established a connection with his soul. If I suddenly die, his soul will scatter as well and he'll become an idiot." Emily was stunned when she heard these words. She then looked anxiously at Han Shua. She discovered that Han Shua's expression had become absent-minded in just an instant. His eyes were unfocused as he stood there, as if he were a statue or a stone person. Even the little skull, who just received Han Shua's order to attack the necromancer, suddenly froze in place. He raised his bone dagger and looked around blankly, as if waiting for Han Shua to give him an order. "Haha, this is a necromancy spell I've recently grasped called Soul Erosion. Using this necromancy spell, I can take over a person's soul as my own. After eroding their soul, I can obtain all their secrets. In this process, I'm connected to the target soul. If I suddenly die, the target won't be able to escape either. Haha." When the necromancer saw that the evil power of the white bone staff had invaded Han Shua's mind, he immediately explained to Emily with a smug expression. Emily was extremely anxious as she looked at Han Shua's current state. She didn't know if she should make a move against this necromancer or not. As an archmage, Emily could clearly feel the enormous evil power of the white bone staff above Han Shua's head pouring into Han Shua's body. Therefore, Emily really didn't dare to doubt the necromancer's words. Just as Emily was extremely anxious and didn't know what to do, the originally lifeless Han Shua suddenly let out a shrill howl. Han Shua's 2 arms ignited with purple and red flames. His entire body seemed to be wrapped in the purple and red flames. His face looked extremely sinister and frightening, and his entire body was filled with an extremely dangerous aura. At the same time, the necromancer, who'd been extremely pleased with himself, suddenly paled. His originally relaxed and proud expression abruptly faded as he yelled with extreme fear, "No, don't." Chapter 157. The white bone staff that had been hovering over Han Shua's head had suddenly flipped over at some point, leaving Han Shua's head and enveloping the necromancer within. The terrified necromancer continuously chanted necromancy spells in an attempt to retrieve the white bone staff, but it was a pity that he was powerless to do so. At the same time, the demon's lair edge suddenly flew out and abruptly stabbed into the necromancer's chest. Red demonic flames instantly ignited above his head, and Han Shua suddenly sat down cross-legged. It was his turn to softly chant necromancy spells. In an extremely short amount of time, the necromancer, whose head had been enveloped in red demonic flames, had been burned beyond recognition. His head was like a piece of black charcoal, and his facial features were no longer discernible. A mysterious incantation sounded from Han Shua's mouth. Han Shua waved his hand, and the white bone staff shot out a web of green light. This web of green light enveloped the necromancer's head, sucking in something like a whirlpool. A cloud of gray aura suddenly floated out of the necromancer's body. It was the same as the souls of the dead in the field, and was slowly caught in the large green net. It floated in front of Han Shua along with the white bone staff. When it reached Han Shua's head, the white bone staff suddenly fell into Han Shua's hand. The green web, along with the necromancer's soul, flowed through Han Shua's mouth, nose, eyes, and ears, bit by bit into Han Shua's head. This series of changes left Emily dumbfounded. She had no idea what had just happened. She couldn't understand why the necromancer, who had been so proud just a moment ago, had lost his soul in an instant and been collected by Han Shua. After the aura of the green web and the necromancer's soul flowed into Han Shua's head through his 7 orifices, Han Shua sat cross-legged without moving. However, his facial expression constantly changed, sometimes joyful, sometimes pained, and sometimes angry. While Han Shua sat cross-legged without moving, Little Skull, who had been standing in place blankly, seemed to be a bit puzzled. Holding the bone dagger in his hand, he paced around the area. When Little Skull walked to the center of the altar, he actually set his eyes on the blood pool where Ansidesi had summoned the 3-eyed demon god. Get out of there! Emily knew that Little Skull had a mysterious connection with Han Shua. When she saw Little Skull run to that dangerous place alone, she immediately shouted. The blood pool in the center of the evil altar was formed from the blood of the many guards and merchants here. In addition, the necromancer had added some kind of malicious substance into it. Emily was afraid that the filth in the blood pool would harm Little Skull's body after he entered. Unfortunately, Emily wasn't Han Shua. Her words had no effect on Little Skull at all. Her shout of, "Get out of there," actually had the opposite effect. Little Skull turned around and rubbed his shiny skull. He looked at Emily with some confusion, then jumped into the blood pool. Oh, heavens! The master is crazy, and even the summoned creature is a little crazy. Emily was about to go crazy with worry and immediately cursed out loud. Although she was cursing, Emily still walked towards the altar, intending to see how she could help Little Skull. When she arrived at the altar, she immediately saw Little Skull splashing around in the blood pool, like an innocent child playing with water. His bony face actually made Emily feel a sense of joy. Oh, what's going on with this Little Skull? Seeing that Little Skull was unharmed and even seemed to be having a lot of fun, Emily was completely at a loss for words. When the corpses fell into the blood pool earlier, their flesh and blood would immediately dissolve, and their bones would also sink into the blood pool without a trace. However, Little Skull didn't seem to be affected at all after entering, which made Emily extremely flabbergasted. Thinking back to the first time she'd met Han Shua, this Little Skull was immune to many dark magic and had chased after her in a frenzy. Emily couldn't help but shake her head with a wry smile. She thought to herself, "It looks like I really can't understand some things." Suddenly, Emily's long eyelashes fluttered rapidly as her eyes stared at the blood pool in confusion. When she looked closely, Emily discovered that the amount of blood in the blood pool seemed to be gradually decreasing. When Emily focused her eyes on Little Skull, she suddenly discovered that the 7 bone spurs on Little Skull's back seemed to be absorbing the blood in the blood pool. This strange discovery caused Emily to groan in shock. She muttered softly, "Heavens, what kind of demon did he create?" The blood in the blood pool was gradually absorbed by the 7 bone spurs on Little Skull's back as he played with the water. When the bottom of the blood pool could be seen, many of the white bones in the pool seemed to be affected by some kind of power and turned into bone powder that fused with the remaining blood. Then, they were absorbed by the 7 bone spurs along with the blood. This process lasted for half an hour. Everything in the blood pool was absorbed by the 7 bone spurs on Little Skull's back. When the blood pool was emptied, Emily discovered that the 7 bone spurs on the little skeleton's back had completely turned a demonic red, like fresh blood. They even faintly emitted a bloody glow, making them look even more terrifying and incisive. The blood pool was square in shape and was more than 3 meters deep after everything disappeared. Little Skull was only a little more than a meter tall. At this moment, he was looking at Emily from the pool, seemingly considering how to climb up. "You're out of ideas now, aren't you?" Emily huffed. She was about to let down a rope and pull Little Skull up. Unexpectedly, as soon as she finished speaking, Little Skull fanned the 7 blood-red bone spurs and wobbled out from the bottom of the blood pool. When he landed beside the dumbstruck Emily, Little Skull didn't even look at Emily. He fanned the 7 bone spurs again and flew to Han Shuo, who was still sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed. "Damn it, you're just as despicable as your master." Although Little Skull didn't have any expression on his face, Emily felt that Little Skull was immensely proud of himself and couldn't help but curse out loud. Emily then saw Little Skull continue to fan the 7 bone spurs and fly around the enormous room. At first, they were wobbly, but gradually became very stable as he flew around. His speed also became faster and faster. In the end, Emily, who was chasing after him, couldn't even turn her eyes. At this moment, Han Shuo exhaled softly and suddenly said, "It's finally done." Emily was shocked and stopped looking at Little Skull. Her beautiful eyes suddenly landed on Han Shuo. Suddenly, Emily froze and looked into Han Shuo's eyes with great astonishment. For a moment, she actually forgot to ask Han Shuo what was going on. Han Shuo's eyes suddenly became exceedingly bright, as dazzling as the brightest star in the vast starry sky. They appeared so enchanting, so deep, yet also gave people a sense of unfathomable mystery. "What's wrong?" Han Shuo looked at Emily's love-struck expression and couldn't help but stand up and walk in front of Emily. He pinched Emily's delicate cheeks and asked with some confusion, "No, nothing. I just discovered that your eyes are brighter, and even your aura seems to have changed." Emily blushed a bit shyly as she pushed Han Shuo's hand away from her cheeks and stammered to Han Shuo, "Heh, so there are such additional benefits to corroding this necromancer's soul." Han Shuo laughed happily and said cheerfully, "Hurry up and tell me, just what's going on?" Emily's curiosity at this moment was enough to kill her. She suddenly reached out and grabbed Han Shuo by the neck and said fiercely, "Cough, cough, all right, all right." Pushing Emily's hands away from his neck, Han Shuo explained with a smile, "I told you before that the martial arts technique I practice is very miraculous. Not only did it strengthen my body, but it also expanded my brain. Just now, he wanted to use the soul erosion magic to take over my soul and obtain all my memories. However, during this process, due to the expansion of my brain, I was also affected by the soul erosion magic and was able to sense all the memories of his soul. Logically speaking, a necromancer of my level definitely wouldn't have the mental strength and processing speed of his brain compared to someone who'd practiced soul erosion. Then, a normal person would have their soul taken over and their memories taken over before they could even figure out his name. It's a pity that my brain has been brutally strengthened, and the tenacity of my nerves isn't something he can imagine. I was faster than him and obtained all of the memories in his soul. I then took over his soul and obtained everything of him. It's that simple." Emily was flabbergasted when she heard this explanation from Han Shuo's mouth. Her face was full of disbelief as she looked at Han Shuo and kept shaking her head as she said lowly, "Unbelievable, truly unbelievable. Just what kind of monster are you?" Han Shuo hugged Emily tightly and said with a cheeky grin, all right, don't be so surprised. We can leave this place now." The demon's lair edge that was still stuck in the necromancer's chest suddenly flew up after he'd finished speaking and landed in Han Shua's hand in an instant. There was still a severed finger at the tip of the demon's lair edge. There was a space ring on the severed finger, which Han Shua unceremoniously put away. Stinking brat, stop flying around. Get down here. Little Skull, who was still happily circling in the air, laughed and called out. Little Skull flew in front of Han Shua and suddenly stopped in front of Han Shua, waving his bone dagger as he glided in the air. He entered the blood pool and absorbed all the blood and bone powder in the blood pool into the 7 bone spurs. Emily was afraid that Han Shua didn't know what Little Skull had done when he closed his eyes and hastily explained to Han Shua. Nodding, Han Shua said with a smile, I know, this isn't the first time he's been so daring. This isn't a big deal. Look, he can even fly now. Isn't that great? I don't even know what kind of demon you've created. I discovered that he seems to have his own emotions. I don't know if it's just my imagination, but when I laughed at him for not being able to climb out of the blood pool, he immediately flew out proudly. Really, I can feel that he's really showing off in front of me. I promise. Emily looked at Little Skull and seemed to suddenly remember what had just happened. She hastily explained to Han Shua. Hehe, don't be surprised. There are too many inconceivable things in this world. I believe that what you're saying isn't an illusion because I've had the same feeling before. Right now, I'm not sure what's going on, but I think that in the future, as he continues to evolve, he'll give me an explanation. Han Shua wasn't surprised at all and pointed at Little Skull with a smile. Emily was stunned when she heard this. After a while, she looked at Little Skull with a wry smile, then looked at Han Shua and scolded, What 2 monsters? There's nothing to be surprised about. You have to learn to adapt to everything about me. Because I think that more and more amazing things will happen to me in the future. Han Shua laughed loudly and seemed to be in a very good mood. Brian, your growth is so fast. Your future accomplishments are unimaginable. Who knows, maybe I won't be able to help you very soon. As for me, I'm just a widow. Will you abandon me in the future? Emily looked at the current Han Shua and suddenly thought of the future. Her beautiful eyes looked at Han Shua and asked a bit strangely. Don't be silly. I'm with you not because you can help me with anything. Even if our identities change in the future, it won't affect us at all. Han Shua looked deeply at Emily as he said this. When he saw Emily's happy expression, he pulled on Emily and said, Let's go. Let's go. Let's leave this place first. We don't need to go anywhere else. I think I've already gotten what you need. The two didn't continue to linger and left hand in hand. The sky had just begun to brighten, so they took advantage of the fact that no one was paying attention and left the place as stealthily as they had come. Chapter 158. The Dark Mantle had their own secret rooms in every city in the Lancelot Empire, and Valen City was naturally no exception. Han Shua sat cross-legged by himself in a secret underground room built from solid rock, slowly digesting the memories of the necromancer's soul. Han Shua didn't take a step out of the secret room for 4 days in a row as he went through the necromancer's decades of memories in his mind. The necromancer named Clarendon was already 52 years old. Han Shua had extracted, filtered, and digested everything he'd experienced in the past 52 years. Han Shua used these 4 days to absorb and memorize dozens of battle experiences, his lifetime's comprehension of necromancy magic, and some of the secrets of his identity. Of course, Han Shua was too lazy to use his brain to remember the other unimportant matters. After learning all of the necromancer's experiences, Han Shua learned that Clarendon had always belonged to an organization called the Calamity Church and had been acting under the orders of the Calamity Church's upper echelons. The operation against Clark this time was completely under the orders of the upper echelons. Clarendon himself didn't know why he had to assassinate Clark. Apart from some matters regarding his identity, Han Shua's greatest gain was that he'd obtained some of the necromancer Clarendon's magical experiences from apprentice to archmage, as well as all of his battle experiences and comprehension before his death. If there really was such a thing as reaching the heavens in a single step in this world, then Han Shua was one of them. Obtaining the necromancer's magical body and battle experiences would allow Han Shua to avoid many detours before he became an archmage. As long as he had enough mental strength, he'd be able to quickly and immediately learn high-level necromancy magic. Clarendon's dozens of battle experiences had greatly enriched Han Shua's horizons and would be immeasurably beneficial to Han Shua's future battles. The immature Han Shua knew everything that needed to be avoided and paid attention to. This kind of gain wasn't any less than the comprehension of necromancy magic. After 4 days, Han Shua had obtained all of Clarendon's valuable memories. However, he did not immediately leave the secret room. Instead, he continued to stay in this secret room and spent another 2 days mastering the other necromancy spells that a journeyman mage should know. When Han Shua walked out of the secret chamber, he felt refreshed and in a good mood. He was even more confident about this operation. Chester was guarding the door. When he saw Han Shua appear, he respectfully said to Han Shua, "You're finally out. Lady Emily told me to bring you to her immediately once you came out." "Hey, Chester, why are you so serious now? I remember you weren't like this when I first met you." Chester's tone had been quite casual and relaxed when he'd interacted with him before, but Chester was noticeably more reserved in front of Han Shua now. His tone was more like a subordinate talking to his superior. This made Han Shua a bit puzzled. "Brian, you're sure to be a great personage in the future. I'm just getting used to it in advance." Chester relaxed slightly and said with a smile. Shaking his head, Han Shua said casually, "Even if I do become a great personage, our relationship shouldn't be so distant." Clapping Chester's shoulder, Han Shua said with a relaxed smile, "Really, mate, relax a bit. You're making me feel a bit awkward when you're so serious." All right, I know what to do. Brian, hurry up and go see Lady Emily. She said to bring you to her immediately once you left." With Han Shua patting his shoulder and talking to him, Chester seemed to be a bit more at ease. He chuckled lightly and quickly led Han Shua to a brightly lit walkway. After a few minutes, Han Shua walked out of the secret underground room and came to the room where Emily was. After arriving here, Chester winked at Han Shua and retreated to the side with a chuckle. He only stopped to guard the place after he was a distance away. In the past few days of getting along, although Han Shua and Emily had deliberately concealed their identities, the tone and movements of their conversation still revealed some ambiguous information. As a thief, Chester was very quick-witted. After getting along for a few days, he naturally discovered some clues. However, Chester was a smart man. He knew that only by getting on well with Han Shua would he have a chance to climb up. Therefore, he knew that even if he understood some things in his heart, he had to pretend that he didn't understand. Han Shua also understood this in his heart, so he wasn't worried that Chester would say anything. Looking at Chester winking at him, Han Shua still had a calm expression on his face. He pushed the door open and walked into Emily's room without any taboo. "Who's there?" Emily was taken aback and suddenly exclaimed from the bathroom inside. Han Shua even heard the sound of water droplets. With a jolt in his heart, Han Shua already knew that Emily was taking a bath at this time. After 6 consecutive days of seclusion, Han Shua had been holding it in for quite a long time. Therefore, after a smirk, he closed the door with a backhand and quickly shot directly into Emily's bathroom. Emily, who was a little panicked at first, immediately knew who it was as soon as she heard Han Shua's smirk. She couldn't help but blush, and her perfect, wet body fell back into the bathtub again. "The thief is here." Han Shua chuckled mischievously and circulated his magical yuan. The clothes on his body suddenly tore apart and fell to the ground, revealing his strong, muscular, and domineering body. He leapt into the bath, causing a huge splash. "Evil thief, I hate you." Emily laughed coquettishly as she slapped at the water, seeming to stop Han Shua's invasion. However, her curses turned into bone-chilling, soul-sucking moans after the span of a few breaths. After a long while, Emily's entire body spasmed and convulsed. She moaned loudly, and the splashes in the pool slowly returned to normal. "So beautiful." Emily gasped lowly and lay her body on Han Shua's broad chest. She said happily, "The evil thing that I love and hate at the same time." Leaning lazily on the edge of the pool, Han Shua said contentedly, Soaking in such a warm bath in such a cold winter is indeed one of life's great joys. Oh, right. Why were you looking for me so urgently? What do you think? Of course I wanted to ask you what you've gained in the past few days. Emily's slender hands unconsciously slid down Han Shua's back as she asked Han Shua. Han Shua took in a refreshing breath and recounted his gains in the past few days to Emily in detail. When Han Shua had finished speaking, Emily was extremely shocked. She looked at Han Shua and said with wild joy, "You've received his understanding and battle experience in necromancy magic. Does this mean that you can quickly train to the archmage level and grasp all the necromancy magic he's already grasped as long as you have enough mental strength?" "I think so. I've just tried practicing another journeyman necromancy magic and discovered that I've completely grasped it in a short amount of time according to this necromancer's experiences. I didn't take any detours in the middle." Han Shua nodded affirmatively and responded to Emily, "My gosh, this is too miraculous, too unbelievable." Emily was overjoyed when she heard Han Shua's words. She couldn't help but repeat these words, seeming to be even more excited than Han Shua himself. The necromancer found these documents in a secret room in the slave trading house. There are business records regarding Bob Asher, and it proves that he was indeed involved in the slave trading house. Han Shua handed over some of the documents he'd obtained from the necromancer regarding the slave trade to Emily after he'd finished his narration. Although the necromancer named Clarendon had set up a magical boundary in his space ring, Han Shua had easily opened the magical boundary because he'd obtained all of the necromancer's memories. He'd obtained a few books on necromancy magic, some medicines to recover mental strength, and a few magic robes that could increase the power of magic. Of course, what satisfied Han Shua the most was the white bone staff that Clarendon had used. This white bone staff should have been made specifically for necromancers. Using this white bone staff to cast necromancy magic would increase the power of Han Shua's necromancy magic. Originally, when Han Shua cast the bone spear spell, only one bone spear would appear, but now, he could cast 2 bone spears at once with this white bone staff. Even the number of dark creatures that could be summoned had increased under the same mental strength. Emily was overjoyed as she held the documents that Han Shua had handed over. She was about to say something when she suddenly thought of something and stared fiercely at Han Shua. She asked urgently, "What organization did you say this necromancer belonged to?" "The Calamity Church." Han Shua started and responded. Emily's expression changed abruptly as her face turned deathly white. She immediately said to Han Shua, "Don't tell anyone that I killed Clarendon. Also, Lawrence came looking for you and told you to go see him when you have time. You can go now and be careful. I need to report the Calamity Church to my brother immediately." Emily hastily gave Han Shua a few more reminders after she'd finished speaking, telling him not to tell anyone about the Calamity Church. She then quickly left for the secret room where the Dark Mantle communicated with the upper echelons through the magic mirror. Chapter 159. Ever since he'd learned of Lawrence's identity, Han Shua had been mulling over how he should interact with him in the future. Judging from the current situation, Lawrence was obviously planning on participating in the struggle for power between the princes. It was just that his identity was an awkward one, and this would make his situation less optimistic. If Lawrence really could inherit the throne, Han Shua wouldn't mind being a bit closer to him, and would even be willing to go on adventures with him. However, if Lawrence didn't have the strength to do so and rashly stayed with him, it would put Han Shua in an extremely unfavorable situation. Therefore, even though he knew Lawrence's identity, Han Shua pretended that he didn't know anything. He walked to Lawrence's house with his usual expression. It was Assassin Lucky who brought Han Shua in this time. After experiencing the assassination of Clark last time, this old assassin seemed to have completely acknowledged Han Shua's strength. His expression was no longer as cold as before as he brought Han Shua into a living room and said, "He's not here for now, but he can return at any time. You can wait here for a while if you're not in a hurry." Nodding, Han Shua looked at old Assassin Lucky and said with a smile, "No problem, I'll wait for a while." "Oh, right. I saw you deal with Calvert afterwards. Did you kill him in the end?" "Of course, not only Calvert, but even his son was killed by me." Old Assassin Lucky had a proud expression on his face. It looked like he was quite proud of his assassination skills. Han Shuo suddenly remembered Lisa's matter as he casually chatted with Lucky. He asked, "Oh right, is Lisa here right now? I want to take advantage of Lawrence's absence to go see her." "Miss Lisa is here. Come with me, I'll take you to see her," Lucky said as he led Han Shuo through a courtyard and into a secluded building in the back. He then reminded Han Shuo in a low voice, "Miss Lisa's emotions have stabilized due to the deaths of Calvert and his son. However, it's best if you don't bring up matters regarding her family." Nodding in understanding, Han Shuo didn't say anything else and approached the building alone, knocking lightly on the door. "Is it Cousin Lawrence?" Lisa asked through the door from inside the room, her voice still a bit sad. "It's me," Han Shuo responded. "Oh, Brian, you've come to see me." Han Shuo could hear the joy he hadn't felt in a long time from Lisa's voice. Footsteps quickly approached as Lisa opened the door to the room and appeared in front of Han Shuo wearing a cotton nightgown. Although the originally innocent and cute Lisa's appearance hadn't changed at all after experiencing the tragic changes in her life, and she was still so young and naive, her bright eyes were always tinged with a faint sadness. Her entire demeanor had become a bit pitiful, and she was quite different from her previous unruly and willful self. He nodded decisively and abruptly sprang into action, breaking through the door and rushing into Lisa's room like lightning. He didn't wait for Lisa to say anything as he casually grabbed a fur coat from the wall and wrapped it around Lisa. He carried Lisa through the window and rushed towards the small path in the back courtyard. The urgent neighing of horses sounded in the distance and quickly approached. Han Shuo knew that the Griffin Legion would have sent quite a few men this time, and he didn't know if Lawrence and the others would be able to escape. Within Valen City, Bob Asher's Griffin Legion could cover the sky with one hand. Even a prince like him would die if he fought them head-on. Chapter 160. Han Shuo immediately focused all of his attention as soon as he left the rear courtyard. Although he was carrying Lisa, Han Shuo's speed was still as fast as lightning. He flew at full speed as soon as he landed on the small path behind him. It was noon at this time, but there weren't many people on the streets even in broad daylight in such a cold winter. Add to that the fact that Valen City had been on high alert for the past 2 days, and the residents had mostly hidden themselves in their homes and refrained from going out. Han Shuo's figure was a bit of an eyesore as he dashed through the streets. 2 Griffin riders were on patrol in the sky, whistling through the air when they spotted Han Shuo's figure. The Griffin screeched, and the 2 Griffin riders flew in Han Shuo's direction with 3-meter-long javelins. "There are Griffins in the sky." Lisa, who was in Han Shuo's arms, had her face flushed red from the cold. When she raised her head to look at the sky, she discovered that the 2 Griffin knights were chasing each other. She hurriedly reminded Han Shuo, "I know, don't worry." Han Shuo had long since seen the 2 Griffin knights tailing him. His expression didn't change as he called out to Lisa in a low voice. His body continued to quickly weave through the chaotic streets as his mind raced for countermeasures. Han Shuo clearly remembered the places he'd passed by on his way to Lawrence. Now that he'd been targeted by the Griffin Riders, Han Shuo quickly thought of a way to deal with them. The Dark Mantle stronghold couldn't be exposed, so he absolutely couldn't return to the Dark Mantle now. There were soldiers of the Griffin Legion patrolling every corner of Valen City. Now that the 2 Griffin riders in the sky had their eyes on him, he had to quickly shake them off or find a place to kill them. Otherwise, even greater trouble would befall him. As his thoughts raced, Han Shuo suddenly changed directions. He no longer used the terrain to weave through the houses, but instead ran in the direction of a patch of forest that he'd seen on his way here. Magical yuan circulated within Han Shuo's body, the surging power seemingly endless. Han Shuo's running speed far exceeded the expectations of the 2 Griffin Knights. The 2 Griffin Legion riders had originally planned on lowering their griffins to kill Han Shuo as soon as he left the area with too many obstructions. Who would have thought that Han Shuo would be riding a sturdy, healthy horse after leaving the area? His swift speed caught the 2 Griffin Legion riders off guard. However, the Griffins naturally had the advantage of flying in the sky. After the 2 Griffin riders steadied themselves, the two griffins finally caught up to Han Shuo. They kept a close eye on Han Shuo as he circled above the forest. This place was already a few miles away from where Lawrence was. Han Shuo had noticed that there were only two griffin knights chasing after him, so he didn't appear to be flustered. When he entered the forest, Han Shuo's body immediately paused and he abruptly stopped. He tossed Lisa into the air and carried her on his back. "Hold on to me tightly. Don't let go no matter what," Han Shuo instructed lowly. Nodding obediently on Han Shuo's back, Lisa said resolutely, "I understand. I won't let go of your hands even if I die." "Don't worry, it won't be the two of us who will die." Han Shuo confidently comforted Lisa. He took out a tough, soft rope from his space ring and wrapped it tightly around Lisa's back, preventing her from falling off midway. After doing all this, Han Shuo grasped the demon's lair edge in his right hand and looked coldly at the two griffin knights circling in the sky, preparing to slaughter the two humans and two magical beasts. "Let's see where you're going," one of the griffin knight above sneered disdainfully. He waved the sharp javelin in his hand and kicked the waist of the griffin he was riding in an odd manner. The griffin circling in the sky suddenly screeched strangely and dove straight for Han Shuo. The griffin's iron claws could tear a wild ox apart. When it swiped at Han Shuo, its enormous body and the knight's cold javelin created a ferocious aura that shocked the soul. The other griffin knight drove the griffin closer to Han Shuo, but didn't immediately make a move. His face was filled with arrogance and disdain, as if he felt that any one of them was more than enough to deal with Han Shuo. He didn't need to make a move at all. Han Shuo's expression was cold as he stood where he was, not moving an inch. His eyes stared closely at the knight and the griffin descending. A white bone staff suddenly appeared in Han Shuo's other hand when the griffin's iron claws were about to reach the trees of the forest. A dark mist spell was quickly cast by Han Shuo. With the amplification effect of the white bone staff, the dark mist spell that Han Shuo had cast had its range increased by 3 times. The area within 10 meters was completely enveloped in darkness. "Ugh, damn it, I can't see anything," the griffin knight shouted angrily, his voice a bit panicked. He'd been chasing after Han Shuo all this time and saw that Han Shuo had been running on foot from beginning to end. That kind of speed was obviously that of a strong swordsman. Han Shuo had been wielding the sword-shaped demon's lair edge ever since he'd arrived in the forest. His movements and postures were completely that of a swordsman's. However, when it came time for the real fight, a white bone staff suddenly appeared in Han Shuo's hand, and he'd cast the dark mist spell in the time it took for sparks to fly off a flint. This immediately gave the griffin knight a fright, and he'd instantly fallen into the trap that Han Shuo had long since planned. When the griffin knight cried out in alarm, the other griffin knight standing proudly in the distance already knew that something wasn't right. He swiftly moved to help his comrade. Unfortunately, it was already too late. In the thick darkness, a bewitching red flame was so dazzling. It didn't seem to be affected by the dark mist spell in the slightest, as it thrillingly displayed its wondrous trajectory in the darkness, outlining a long, blood-red line. The griffin's strange cries of pain and the griffin knight's shrill screams seemed to appear along with the bewitching red flame. As the blood-red line streaked through the darkness, terrifying cries of pain rang out incessantly. Only when the bewitching red flame was extinguished did the cries of pain and despair finally return to silence. The other griffin knight, who'd already arrived in the area, felt his scalp tingle as he listened to the tragic cries. He couldn't see what was happening with his eyes, and could only ask anxiously, "Kemp, what's going on? What happened?" He kept yelling, but the griffin knight didn't dare approach the dark mist, and could only drive the griffin knight to observe from afar. The dark mist spell came quickly and disappeared just as quickly. The dark mist that had suddenly gathered quickly disappeared under a gust of chilly wind. Han Shuo stood motionless in the same position with a cruel, callous, and sinister smile on his face. On his back, Lisa buried her head deep into Han Shuo's neck, her eyes tightly shut. She couldn't bear to look at Han Shuo. Around Han Shuo, there were bloody severed limbs and flesh scattered all over the ground. Some belonged to the griffin knight, while others belonged to the Griffin Knight. The thick stench of blood was extremely pungent. Han Shuo raised his foot and stepped on a head with brain juice slowly flowing out. Han Shuo looked as if he'd been baptized in blood. His face and body were covered in blood, making his already sinister expression look even more terrifying. A retching sound suddenly came from the observing Griffin Knight. After that retching sound, he immediately spurred the griffin to fly far away in fear. "Do you think you're the only one who can fly?" Han Shuo cackled cruelly as he activated the art of the demonic ninth heavens. His body broke through the air and shot towards the Griffin Knight with Lisa in tow. Before the Griffin Knight could fly too far, Han Shuo's body had already appeared behind him. Two bone spears shot out and stabbed into the griffin's rear rump, causing the Griffin Knight to let out a shrill screech. It actually turned around and charged towards Han Shuo with the Griffin Knight. The Griffin Knight had gone through the initial panic and was now being carried by the Griffin Knight towards Han Shuo. He quickly understood that Han Shuo, who could fly, wouldn't give him a chance to escape. Therefore, he raised the javelin in his hand and shot it towards Han Shuo. Every Griffin Knight was a former adept knight. Therefore, when the Griffin Knight raised his javelin, a deep green fighting aura blossomed out and was like a bolt of silver lightning in the air. He borrowed the momentum of the Griffin Knight's charge to directly stab towards Han Shuo. Han Shuo had just used the Demon's Lair Edge's sharpness to cut a Griffin Knight and his griffin into pieces. An irrepressible thirst for blood and slaughter welled up in his heart. It was as if a voice in his heart was urging Han Shuo to continue this bloody slaughter. When he saw the Griffin Knight charging over, that irrepressible thirst for blood and slaughter was the perfect opportunity to vent. Howling fiercely at the sky, Han Shuo cackled as he leapt forward. The Demon's Lair Edge, which wasn't particularly long to begin with, actually spat out a 2-meter-long purple and red light due to the circulation of the mystical glacial spellfire. The purple light was in front, and the red light was connected to the Demon's Lair Edge from behind, appearing quite mystical. When the art of the demonic ninth heavens was deployed, Han Shuo's speed wasn't much slower than the Griffin Knight's, even with Lisa on his back. Circulating his magical yuan at full force, the thick, killing aura emanating from Han Shuo's body formed a cloud of black mist around his body. From afar, the image of Han Shuo holding the Demon's Lair Edge looked like a meteor crashing to the earth. A dazzling ball of light exploded from the point of contact between the two as the deafening sound of metal clashing rang out in the surroundings. The Demon's Lair Edge, which was imbued with the mystical glacial spellfire, shot out a meter-long cold purple light. When it met with the fighting aura on the spear, the Griffin Knight's tightly gripped spear was crushed to pieces by the violent magical yuan. The bone-chilling cold spread through the Griffin Knight's entire body in an instant. He only shivered and hadn't had the time to defend against the cold poison that had entered his body when another meter of red spellfire condensed. Under the burning of the bone-chilling cold and the fire poison, the veins in the Griffin Knight's right arm that had just gripped the silver spear suddenly ruptured. His muscles tightened and loosened, dripping blood as if acid had been poured on them. "You shouldn't have chased me." Han Shuo grinned viciously as he faced the terrified Griffin Knight. After saying these words, the Demon's Lair Edge suddenly spun according to his will and chopped off the Griffin Knight's iron claws. He then raised the Demon's Lair Edge and chopped downwards, chopping the Griffin Knight and the griffin into two halves with the force of a mountain. Fresh blood sprayed out like rain, sprinkling into the forest. The two Griffin Knights had been brutally killed by Han Shuo, but Han Shuo still felt that he hadn't had enough. At this moment, Han Shuo was startled and abruptly reacted. He finally understood why he had such a strong desire to kill. After his magical yuan had reached the true demon realm, Han Shuo had truly become a demon. This was the first time that Han Shuo possessed such tyrannical strength in this realm, and it was very difficult for him to suppress the desires in the depths of his heart. This was especially true for the next realm after the true demon realm, which was the most dangerous bloodlust realm. Before entering the bloodlust realm, demonic practitioners would begin to have the desire to kill in every battle. It was a good thing that he hadn't entered the bloodlust realm yet. so Han Shuo could still control his thoughts and desires. Once Han Shuo reached the bloodlust realm, it would be even more difficult for him to control his desire to kill. Once a battle began, he wouldn't rest until there was blood and would become an extremely bloodthirsty demon. Exhaling lightly, Han Shuo thought to himself that the training of magical yuan was truly very dangerous and perverse. However, the carefree slaughter today had made Han Shuo feel quite satisfied. His entire being felt as if he'd been reborn. Over there, chase them. The whinnying of a large group of horses sounded from afar. Han Shuo stopped high in the air and looked into the distance. He discovered that a squad of Griffin Legion cavalry was quickly charging in his direction. This squad was made up of well-trained knights, so Han Shuo wasn't afraid that he wouldn't be able to shake them off. Snorting coldly, Han Shuo's body flew through the air and dived downwards. He only abruptly sped off when he was level with the trees. You can actually fly. It was only at this moment that Lisa suddenly moved her lips to Han Shuo's ear and exclaimed in indescribable shock. Chapter 161. Han Shuo put Lisa down in the middle of a rocky slope in the desolate outskirts of Valen City. With the art of the demonic ninth heavens, the 10-meter-tall city walls couldn't stop Han Shuo from crossing them at all. The current Valen City was in a state of chaos. The Griffin Legion seemed to have taken stimulants as they went about capturing suspects. As a direct participant, Han Shuo was being chased by a troop of cavalry. It was only natural that he would temporarily leave the city to hide for Lisa's sake. Suddenly, Lisa, who had been put down by Han Shuo, fiercely hugged Han Shuo from behind. Her abnormally well-developed breasts pressed tightly against Han Shuo's back. Han Shuo could clearly feel the soft, smooth, and firm sensation. Han Shuo had been carrying Lisa on his back the entire time, but because of the dangerous situation, Han Shuo had been fighting and dodging all the time and hadn't paid attention to anything else. Now that the two of them were out of danger, Lisa suddenly hugged Han Shuo from behind. This immediately gave Han Shuo a strange feeling. Do you like it? Lisa pressed her chest against Han Shuo's from behind. She moved her cherry lips to Han Shuo's ear and blew out a breath of hot air, speaking shyly in a low voice. Taking a deep breath, Han Shuo flipped over to face Lisa. He used a bit of force to release Lisa from his body and smiled. All right, we're safe for now. It'll be harder for the Griffin Legion to capture us now that we've left Valen City. Don't worry. Pouting, Lisa once again moved closer to Han Shuo and suddenly hugged Han Shuo. Her two arms locked tightly around Han Shuo's waist, and she said softly, I'm nothing now. All my family is gone. What should I do in the future? Patting Lisa's shoulder, Han Shuo reassured her, Don't worry, Lawrence will definitely take care of you. He immediately rushed over from the Empire's capital after learning of your accident. He really loves you very much. When I was young, I played with Cousin Lawrence, and he loved me very much at that time. For so many years, he has treated me like a real brother. I am very grateful to him, Lisa said innocently when she heard Han Shuo mention Lawrence. She then cried out in alarm and said with great worry, Oh no, Brother Lawrence didn't leave with us. Will he be in danger? Don't worry, your brother Lawrence isn't a simple person. If he can't even get through this little danger, then he would have lived all these years in vain. As the third prince, Lawrence had always been taught by his ambitious mother. In addition, he was highly regarded by His Majesty the Empire and had a few experts by his side to assist him. It shouldn't be a problem for him to leave safely. Oh right, you still haven't answered me. Why can you fly? Han Shuo's words of comfort were quite useful to Lisa. She suddenly thought of this matter after letting out a sigh of relief. Her beautiful eyes stared closely at Han Shuo. This is a bit hard to explain. I can only tell you that I'm not using the levitation technique that only archmages can use. As for how I'm able to fly, I can only say that it's a peculiar martial technique. Whether it was to Emily or Lisa, this art of the demonic ninth heavens wasn't easy to explain, nor could it be explained clearly. Therefore, Han Shuo could only muddle through. A group of more than 10 people suddenly appeared in the distance and slowly walked in the direction of Valen City. Han Shuo took a look from afar and didn't think much of it when he discovered that these people weren't wearing the clothes of the Griffin Legion. He continued to stand there and talk to Lisa. The rocky slope that Han Shuo and Lisa were on happened to be where they'd passed by. When the group neared Han Shuo, a soft exclamation suddenly sounded from within. Brian, what are you doing here? Han Shuo started, and then looked at the group of people. He suddenly discovered that there was a familiar face, Candace, amongst them. The well-built Candace carried a broadsword on her back and wore a thin, tight swordsman's uniform. She looked as if she didn't fear the onslaught of winter. When she saw that Han Shuo was here, she turned around and gestured to the mercenaries behind her, walking valiantly towards Han Shuo. When she arrived in front of Han Shuo, she swept a glance at Han Shuo and said with a slight frown, "You wouldn't have taken this little girl to such a rocky slope in such cold weather, would you?" "None of your business." Lisa flicked a glance at Candace, seeming to dislike the tone of her voice as she yelled unkindly. Struggling for a bit, Han Shuo extricated himself from Lisa's embrace. He first looked at the Battlefire mercenary band behind Candace and discovered that there were a total of 6 of them. 5 of them had spread out and were surrounding a beautiful girl with a veil over her face, seeming to be protecting her safety. Glancing behind Candace, Han Shuo understood that Candace had perhaps accepted a mission and was protecting the veiled girl. He then turned his gaze to Candace and said with a light smile, "Long time no see, Candace. You must have accepted another mission and are currently in the middle of it?" Nodding her head, Candace calmly admitted it. She laughed heartily and replied, "That's right. My life is one of hard work. How could I be as carefree as you? You still have the leisure to come here and have a secret rendezvous on such a cold day. Don't make wild guesses. We just happened to land here because of a few things." Han Shuo smiled wryly at Candace and opened his mouth to explain. "It's just a tryst. What does that have to do with you?" Lisa's little mouth pouted and seemed to have recovered her shrewdness from back in the academy. She glared at Candace like a belligerent little hen provoking her. All right. What's there to argue about?" Han Shuo was a bit baffled and patted Lisa with a smile, indicating for her to speak less. "This little girl is a bit interesting, hee. Oh right, Brian. How are things between you and Phoebe?" Candace looked at Lisa with amusement and then stared at Han Shuo. "Same old. I'm doing business with her. She's taken over the Merchant Guild and has been incredibly busy lately." Han Shuo responded carelessly and suddenly asked Candace, "Are you going to Valen City this time?" Nodding, Candace said, "That's right. We've accepted a mission this time to protect Miss Belinda on her way to Valen City. We'll send her back safely after she's finished with her business in Valen City." Because Candace and Han Shuo had experienced life and death together last time, Candace had already acknowledged Han Shuo in the depths of her heart. Therefore, she didn't have any reservations and calmly stated the objective of this time's mission. A thought occurred to Han Shuo, and he thought for a moment before reminding Candace, "Valen City hasn't been very peaceful recently. Of the 2 sons of Griffin Legion Commander Bob Asher, one has been missing for a few months and the other, Clark, was killed just 2 days ago. The chief is extremely angry and everyone in Valen City is on high alert. If there's nothing particularly important, I suggest that your employer doesn't choose this time to enter the city." "Thank you. I'll mention your suggestion to my employer, but it's not up to me to decide if she's willing to listen." Candace was quite surprised when she heard of this matter. It was obvious from her furrowed brow that this matter was very important to her, but she was a mercenary. Once she'd accepted her employer's request, she had to follow through with the original agreement. She had no right to change anything even if something went wrong along the way, or she'd have to bear additional compensation. Therefore, she could only say this. Nodding, Han Shuo was about to say something when his brow suddenly furrowed, and he abruptly turned to look in the direction that Candace and the others had come from. He hesitated for a moment before asking, "Did you encounter any danger along the way?" Candace started, and then suddenly thought of Han Shuo's miraculous abilities. Her charming face froze and she quickly responded, "We did encounter some danger along the way, but it was quite easy for us to deal with." "Why do you say this? Did you discover something?" "There was another group of people behind you when you appeared. Apart from me, They had nothing to do with you at first and should be another group heading into Valence City. However, when a gust of wind blew over just now, I seemed to hear the words Belinda through the wind. If I'm not wrong, this group of people who've been keeping a distance from you must have something to do with your employer, Belinda? Han Shuo responded with a frown. If it had been anyone else who'd said Han Shuo's words, Candace wouldn't have believed them at all because even she hadn't been able to see any movement from such a distance. Not only had Han Shuo sensed that a group of people was following them, but he'd also heard their voices through the wind. This was an unimaginable matter. Only a wind Grand Magus would be able to borrow the wind's power and hear the voices of people far away. Han Shuo was obviously far from this level. However, Candace, who'd gone through trials and tribulations with Han Shuo, understood that Han Shuo possessed miraculous abilities. Having long since witnessed Han Shuo's abilities, Candace believed Han Shuo's words without any doubt. Her long eyelashes fluttered as she furrowed her brow in thought and said to Han Shuo, "Which direction are they in? How many people are there, and roughly how strong are they?" Chapter 162. There are 3 people 500 meters behind you. Because of the distance and their ordinary attire, I can't tell how strong they are. Han Shuo took note of the situation and observed for a while with narrowed eyes before answering Candace's question in a low voice. "Thank you, Brian. I'll remember your help," Candace exclaimed softly and didn't say anything more to Han Shuo. She turned around and returned to the Battlefire mercenary band, discussing a few things with the other mercenaries. "Who is she to you? Why are you willing to help her?" Lisa tugged on Han Shuo's sleeve after Candace left and asked Han Shuo, "An old friend. Let's go. We'll leave this place from the other side. We still have to return to Valence City in a bit." Han Shuo looked at Candace and saw that she was still in discussion with her employer and a few people from the Battlefire mercenary band. He knew that his words had already made Candace understand. Candace was a mercenary and had her own missions and lifestyle. Han Shuo had come across her and seen that there were hidden dangers in her mission, so he gave her a careless reminder out of goodwill. He could be considered to have done his part as a friend, but he wouldn't interfere in her matters. Lisa didn't say anything when she heard that Han Shuo wanted to leave. She lowered her head a bit bashfully and walked to Han Shuo's back, wrapping her arms around his neck. She leapt onto Han Shuo's back and smiled merrily in Han Shuo's ear. "I still want you to carry me." Han Shuo was speechless and laughed helplessly. He said to Lisa on his back, "I had no choice but to carry you on my back because the situation was urgent just now. Now that we're out of danger, you don't need me to carry you anymore. It's fine if we walk slowly back to the city." "Hee, I don't care what you say. I'm not getting off." Lisa's small hands wrapped around Han Shuo's neck and her 2 meaty thighs crossed over Han Shuo's waist, appearing very pleased. Lisa was at the age of youth and vitality. Because of Han Shuo's encouragement and guidance, Lisa's originally flat chest had become ridiculously full. Han Shuo even felt that her chest wasn't much smaller than Emily's from the shape of her back. The soft beauty of her chest pressed so tightly against his body made Han Shuo feel a bit restless. In the distance, Candace conversed with her employer and companions for a bit. She seemed to have made up her mind to continue on to Valence City and didn't pay any attention to the 3 people tailing them. After making up their minds, they continued towards Valence City. Candace looked over from afar and happened to see Han Shuo carrying Lisa on his back. She couldn't help but reveal an astonished expression. Lisa, who was on Han Shuo's back, raised her head proudly when she saw Candace's astonished gaze, as if showing off something to Candace. Candace couldn't help but let out a soft laugh. "Hold on tight. We're going as well." Seeing that Lisa was determined to carry him, Han Shuo didn't force her to come down. Lisa had just lost her parents and was at her most dejected and pained time. Han Shuo didn't want to upset her at this time, so he instructed in a low voice and walked off from another path, avoiding Candace's group and heading towards Valence City in a different direction. It was already evening. Han Shuo determined the direction and circled around the city walls. When night fell, he used the art of the demonic ninth heavens to bring Lisa over the city walls and into Valence City. Arriving at the hotel Emily had stayed in last time, Han Shuo walked straight to the room Emily was staying in. Before Han Shuo had even entered, he heard Chester call out in a low voice, "Who is it?" "It's me," Han Shuo replied and pushed open the door to walk in. He then looked at Chester in surprise and asked, "Why are you here?" Chester looked at Lisa on Han Shuo's back and hesitated before replying. "Madam Emily said that this might be the place where you and Lawrence would meet up. So she told me to stay here and perhaps wait for news from either you or Lawrence." "Then, have you received any news from Lawrence?" Emily had arranged for people from the Dark Mantle to watch over this place. On one hand, because of Lisa, Han Shuo couldn't go directly to the Dark Mantle. On the other hand, Han Shuo had told Lawrence that he was staying at this place. If Lawrence escaped, he would contact him here. Therefore, Han Shuo had decided to stay here temporarily. Nodding, Chester replied, "Lawrence didn't come, but he sent someone here. That person told me that if you and Lisa came back, you should send Lisa to this location." Chester handed a card to Han Shuo as he spoke. The location recorded on the card wasn't far from here. What did the person Chester sent look like? Han Shuo had to ask cautiously just in case. After Chester described the person's appearance, Han Shuo immediately knew that it was the old assassin Lucky. Therefore, he knew that there shouldn't be any problems with this matter. Putting Lisa down, Han Shuo looked at Lisa and said seriously, "Lisa, what we're doing is very dangerous. Follow Chester to where your cousin Lawrence is. Lawrence will send you back to the Empire in a short period of time. Be good, understand? We'll stay here and help you take revenge." After experiencing the tragic changes in her life, Lisa was much more mature than Han Shuo had imagined. After Han Shuo finished speaking, although Lisa's expression was a bit reluctant, she still nodded obediently and agreed to Han Shuo's arrangements. Hire a carriage and personally take Miss Lisa to the location on Lawrence's card. Hand her safely into Lawrence's hands. Han Shuo smiled as he looked at Chester. "Don't worry, there won't be any problems with me doing this." Chester promised Han Shuo very confidently and then bowed to Lisa, making an inviting gesture. Lisa looked deeply at Han Shuo and said a bit worriedly to Han Shuo after a while, "Be careful, don't let anything happen to you." "Don't worry, I'll be fine. Hurry and leave with him while it's still dark." Han Shuo nodded and urged Lisa with a smile. After Han Shuo's words, Lisa turned and followed Chester, the two quickly making their way outside. The Dark Mantle's influence in such a large city naturally wasn't small. If Han Shuo was willing to send Lisa back to the Empire, it wouldn't be too much of a hassle. However, Han Shuo had just joined the Dark Mantle, and it wasn't too good for him to use the Dark Mantle's resources for personal matters. In addition, Lawrence was the third prince. If he was in charge of this matter, he would make proper arrangements for Lisa's arrival in the Empire. After Lisa left, Han Shuo turned and walked into the inner room, saying with a smile, "Come out." Emily, neatly dressed in a soft fur coat, walked out from the inner room with a smile. She rolled her eyes at Han Shuo when she arrived next to him and reached out to pinch Han Shuo. She said with a bit of jealousy, "You went to Lawrence's place and abducted his sister back. You even made him come to me to ask for her. You're really something." Grasping Emily's pinching hand and pulling, Han Shuo pulled Emily into his embrace, his hands roaming all over Emily's voluptuous body. He smiled and explained, "I'm not as bad as you imagine me to be. It's only because Lawrence's location was exposed that I had no choice but to take her and escape." After explaining the course of events, Emily was relieved. She then said to Han Shuo with a frown, "According to Lawrence, he may have come to deal with Bobby Asher with the king's tacit approval. This may be one of the king's methods to test Lawrence. Lawrence's future path will be determined through his performance this time." Han Shuo was slightly startled when he heard Emily's words. Han Shuo hadn't thought so much and only reacted after hearing Emily's words. After musing for a moment, Han Shuo opened his mouth. "If this is the case, then there is still a possibility of us cooperating with Lawrence. Indeed, Dark Mantle members aren't bound by any restrictions when carrying out missions. If the timing is right, I don't mind cooperating with Lawrence. However, we need to be sure of exactly how to act." Emily's slender eyebrows were tightly knit as she spoke thoughtfully. Emily's concerns stemmed from Lawrence's identity as prince. She was afraid that others would misunderstand their relationship with Lawrence before the situation was clear. If Lawrence couldn't become king in the end and another prince took over, then Emily, Han Shuo, and the others who were too close to Lawrence would very likely face unexpected misfortune. Therefore, Emily was very cautious. I understand what you mean. Don't worry, I know my limits in my dealings with Lawrence, Han Shuo said in a low voice. Grasping the trembling white-boned staff with all his strength, Han Shuo was also a bit baffled. He shook his head and quickly replied, I don't know what's going on either. This has never happened when I used this staff in the past. As soon as he finished speaking, the sound of disorderly footsteps quickly approached, followed by Candace's cry of alarm. Han Shuo's heart jumped as if he'd faintly grasped something. He immediately put the white-boned staff back into his space ring and gestured to Emily, quietly walking towards the window. Chapter 163. He pushed the window up a bit and opened a narrow crack. Through this crack, Han Shuo could see the scene outside. Candace's employer, Belinda, was wearing a veil, revealing only a pair of sapphire eyes. There was a strange expression in them as she seemed to be searching for something. She walked to the hallway of Han Shuo and Emily's room and looked around. Candace and a few others from the Battlefire mercenary band ran over frantically from behind Belinda. Candace had a face full of wariness as she pressed a hand to the magic sword on her back and looked around carefully, afraid that something might happen to Belinda. Candace finally breathed a sigh of relief after the other mercenaries surrounded Belinda. She chided Belinda, who was still looking around. Miss Belinda, I hope that you'll let us know in advance when you're moving around in the future. We were only hired by you to protect you and not restrict your freedom. There's no need for you to run away so suddenly. Belinda's long and slender eyebrows were furrowed tightly behind her veil as she looked around with her beautiful eyes, appearing quite puzzled. Belinda seemed to suddenly come to her senses after Candace's displeased words and said apologetically to Candace, I'm sorry, I just thought I saw someone I knew and hurried over to take a look. It was just my eyes playing tricks on me. Candace was also quite puzzled by her words and said to Belinda in surprise, There was no one here just now. How did you see someone? This is too strange. Oh, perhaps it's because I haven't had enough sleep lately and my eyes are playing tricks on me. I'm very sorry. Belinda's bright eyes swept over Han Shuo and Emily's room as she responded carelessly to Candace. Panicked footsteps could be heard from behind. A plump, middle-aged woman walked over with a smile, holding a book in her hand. He first bowed politely, then said apologetically, Esteemed guests, you must be here to stay. I had to leave for a while just now. I'm very sorry. Please follow me to the counter to register. There's no one watching over this hotel. That's worrying. In addition, the environment here doesn't seem to be too good. Would Miss Belinda like to switch to another hotel? Candace didn't seem to like this place and suggested to her employer, Belinda, with a sour face. The veiled Belinda looked around with her bright eyes and said, No need. I'll stay here. I think it's not bad here. All right then. Candace had no choice but to listen to her employer and responded with a bit of disappointment. Excuse me, who are the people staying in the rooms on the side of this corridor? Belinda turned around and seemed to be asking the fat hotel owner casually, I'm sorry, it's not convenient for us to disclose that. That's our customers' privacy. I'm sorry. The owner of this hotel was quite principled. Judging from her expression, she very much wanted Candace and the others to stay, but she didn't budge when it came to her principles. Nodding, Belinda didn't pursue the matter and said gently, That's fine as well. Are there any empty rooms around this corridor? I'll stay here if there are. The woman's eyes lit up and she quickly flipped through the book in her hand, then pointed at a room not far from Han Shuo and Emily. There's an empty room here, but the conditions aren't the best in the hotel. If the esteemed miss doesn't mind, you can stay in this room immediately. No problem. I'll take this room. Candace, do as you see fit, Belinda said gently, and her bright eyes flicked faintly at Han Shuo and Emily's rooms, then took the lead to walk to the room she'd reserved. The owner of this hotel had long since known that Belinda was the owner of this group. When she saw Belinda walk in that direction, she quickly fished out a bunch of keys and opened the door for her when she reached it, letting her in. "You guys go in and protect the miss first. I'll take care of the paperwork and arrange other rooms around Miss Belinda's." Candace gave some instructions to the other members of the Battlefire Mercenary Band when she saw Belinda enter, and then followed the happy fat woman back to the front desk to take care of the check-in procedures. When the other members of the Battlefire Mercenary Band had followed Belinda into the room, Han Shuo closed the crack in the window and said lowly to Emily beside him, "The strange movements of the white-bone staff must have something to do with this Belinda. Her identity is very suspicious." Emily had also seen a bit of what had happened just now and immediately nodded in agreement when she heard Han Shuo's words. She said very gravely, "It looks like this Belinda is related to the necromancer you killed. Since you've obtained all of his memories, don't you have any impression of this Belinda?" Han Shuo furrowed his brow and shook his head with certainty. "No, this Belinda has never appeared in Clarendon's memories. I really don't understand why she can sense the white-bone staff." "How did Clarendon obtain this white-bone staff?" Emily started and changed her question to Han Shuo after thinking for a bit. Clarendon was rewarded by the upper echelons of the Calamity Church after he completed a certain number of missions. He only knew how to use the white-bone staff, but didn't know its origins. Han Shuo closed his eyes and thought for a bit before speaking to Emily. "It looks like this Belinda should be from the Calamity Church. Perhaps it's because of Clarendon's disappearance that she's appeared here. We need to be careful." Emily thought for a bit and said gravely, "Belinda was Candace's employer. If she was from the Calamity Church, then why would she ask Candace to protect her when she came to Valen City?" This was something that Han Shuo couldn't quite understand. However, since Belinda could sense the white-bone staff, this meant that her origins weren't simple. When he connected this to what Emily had said about the evils of the Calamity Church, Han Shuo began to ponder inwardly. This Belinda must be suspicious of the rooms in this hallway. I think we should temporarily leave this place and switch rooms to observe this Belinda. Han Shuo looked at Emily and suggested after thinking for a bit. Nodding, Emily said confidently, "No problem. The owner of this hotel is one of us. We can switch rooms if we want." No wonder Emily would choose to stay in this hotel when she arrived in Valen City. So it was because the owner of this hotel was also a member of the Dark Mantle. It looked like the Dark Mantle's intelligence network was quite extensive indeed. Taking advantage of Candace's absence, Belinda and the other members of the Battlefire Mercenary Band entered the room. Han Shuo and Emily left the room and snuck out from the other side, arriving in a large hall on the second floor. Han Shuo and Emily leaned against the window and could see the front yard. Emily activated some mechanism and the owner of the hotel, the middle-aged woman, appeared merrily in the hall after a while. She still wore a professional smile and bowed slightly to Emily, asking with a smile, "What are your orders, Madam Emily?" "Sister Elaine, arrange a new room for us. It's best if it's a bit away from Belinda, but still within view of her room." Emily also smiled amiably as she spoke. The middle-aged woman named Elaine was a bit surprised when she heard Emily's words. She thought for a bit and said, "3 people just came in and also requested a room where they can see Miss Belinda." His thoughts raced. Han Shuo thought of the 3 people who'd been tailing Candace. He couldn't help but ask, "Where are they staying now? Have you arranged a room for them?" "Don't worry. I've purposely left a room where they can observe Belinda. I saw that Belinda's gaze when she looked at your room just now and knew that there was something wrong with her." Elaine flicked a glance at Han Shuo and revealed a look that said, "Don't worry about me taking care of things. Sister Elaine has made many contributions to our organization over the years. Although she doesn't know martial arts or magic, she's very observant. That's why I'm staying here in Valen City." Emily also rolled her eyes at Han Shuo and explained with a smile, "All right, Madam Emily, don't praise me so much. I'll arrange a new room for you. Also, I'll keep an eye on the people who just arrived today. If there's anything, I'll report to you immediately." Elaine turned around and walked out of the room. "All right, let's make our preparations as well. We need to keep a close eye on that woman. Perhaps uncovering her identity will bring us great benefits," Emily said. Chapter 164. They moved to another room. This room was separated by the fake mountain in the courtyard, and they could see the window of Belinda's room on the other side. Candace seemed to be discussing something with Belinda after she'd returned, and hadn't come out since. The other mercenaries of the Battlefire mercenary band had been arranged by Candace into the 2 rooms next to Belinda's. The 3 people who'd been following Candace entered the hotel and stayed next to Han Shua's group. Using a magical mirror, Han Shua and Emily could see the movements of the 3 people in front of them. The 3 people in the group were 3 men with ordinary looks, and their appearances were actually quite similar. It looked like they might be brothers. When they moved into the next room, one of them leaned against the window and observed Belinda, while the other 2 seemed to be too tired and directly fell asleep on the bed. It was still daytime, and neither group made any movements, maintaining a steady silence. Han Shua observed for a bit and saw that there were no abnormalities on either side. He returned to Emily's side and thought for a bit. "You stay here and keep watch for me. I'm going back to the Cemetery of Death to see what's going on inside before coming back." "Oh, why are you suddenly thinking of going back to the Cemetery of Death?" Emily was a bit surprised by Han Shua's decision and looked at Han Shua in confusion. Smiling mysteriously, Han Shua said, "I've recently taken in a lackey. I'm going to see if his injuries have healed." As they spoke, Han Shua walked into the inner room and lifted the wooden boards of the cupboard, setting up a transportation matrix inside. Emily had long since grown accustomed to Han Shua's mysteriousness. She didn't ask further when she saw that Han Shua was about to leave and said, "All right then, I'll stay here and observe them. I'll go pull you back if anything happens. It's best if you don't stray too far from the Cemetery of Death." Don't worry, I'll be in the Cemetery of Death. You can come find me at any time if there's anything out of the ordinary." Han Shua answered, then stood in the teleportation array, closed the wooden door of the cupboard, and activated the teleportation array. "Gilbert, where the hell did you go?" Han Shua immediately yelled as soon as he returned to the Cemetery of Death. With a whoosh, the little lewd dragon Gilbert appeared in front of Han Shua and kowtowed as soon as he arrived. He said pitifully, "Honorable Master, you've finally remembered your loyal servant. There's nothing fun to do in this damned place, and I can't go out either. I'm about to suffocate to death. I told you to look after that place for me. You didn't slack off, did you?" Before leaving, Han Shua had instructed Gilbert to pay attention to the area where the Earth Elite zombie was being refined, in order to prevent any trouble from occurring. "Of course I'm not slacking off, but there's really nothing to see in that place. Nothing has changed since you left." "Oh, Honorable Master, when are you going to take me out to look for beautiful women?" Gilbert complained as he looked at Han Shua. Compared to his charred appearance last time, the current Gilbert was dressed in a shiny black robe, and his hair was meticulously combed. Apart from his skin being as dark as charcoal, the young Gilbert could be considered quite handsome. "How are your injuries?" Whether or not to take Gilbert out still depended on his physical condition. Although this little lewd dragon was a mess, his strength as a dark dragon was extraordinary, and he would be a good helper. Gilbert puffed out his chest when he heard this question and boasted, "There's no problem. As one of the dark dragons with the strongest physical bodies on the continent, this kind of injury isn't a problem for me." "Cut the crap, how are your injuries?" Han Shua glared and shouted softly. As his master, Han Shua was bound by a contract with him and could more or less sense the state of his body. Although his body was much better than before, Han Shua could feel that he hadn't fully recovered yet. Therefore, he couldn't help but shout when he heard Gilbert's boastfulness. Shrinking his head, Gilbert smiled apologetically. "I haven't fully recovered yet, but it's no big deal. I definitely won't drag you down." Nodding, Han Shua said, "All right, I'll consider taking you out, probably in the next 2 days. Rest assured and heal your injuries. If you drag me down when I need your help in the future, I won't let you off the hook." Han Shua got up and walked towards the area where the Earth Elite zombie had been refined. In the center of the area where the Earth Elite zombie had been hidden, a large part of the area had sunk in. The thick essence of Earth continued to slowly flow in. After observing his surroundings, Han Shua concentrated his mental strength and connected with the zombie inside. When Han Shua did this, he immediately felt a surging vitality. This vitality was brimming with rich earth energy, and Han Shuo immediately understood that the Earth Elite zombies' refinement was on the right track. This was because when ordinary zombies were summoned, they would only feel a deathly stillness when they connected with their mental strength. Only extremely powerful dark creatures, such as those evil knights, would be able to sense some vitality. Right now, this zombie warrior's body was filled with dense vitality and rich Earth Yuan Qi. This meant that after absorbing the earth essence of this place of extreme earth, it was truly growing. All right, you stay here and recuperate. I'll let you out in a few days. Seeing that the cemetery of death was safe, and that Dark Dragon Gilbert and the Earth Elite Zombie were slowly recovering, Han Shuo also set his mind at rest and got up to return to the cemetery of death. After receiving Han Shuo's promise, Gilbert appeared to be very excited. He couldn't help but praise Han Shuo's wisdom and martial prowess beside Han Shuo. His fawning smile made Han Shuo not know whether to laugh or cry. When he walked into the cemetery of death, Han Shuo was about to use the transportation matrix to leave when he suddenly remembered that he hadn't entered the underground secret room in a while. Now that Han Shuo's mental strength had increased again, Han Shuo planned to try and see if he could advance to the next level. Leaving Gilbert where he was, Han Shuo walked down the secret room by himself. The boundary on the first level was easily broken by Han Shuo's mental strength, allowing Han Shuo to walk in. When he arrived at the same place on the next level, Han Shuo gathered his mental strength and suddenly dashed forward, wanting to descend to the next level of the cemetery of death. With a bang, Han Shuo crashed into the boundary and was instantly bounced off, a piercing pain in his head. Han Shuo, who had fallen to the ground, slowly stood up. He immediately understood that his mental strength wasn't enough to advance to the next level. With a thought, Han Shuo, still holding the Eye of Darkness in one hand, took out the white bone staff from his space ring. This cemetery of death had once been a holy land for necromancers, and the green Eye of Darkness was the key to opening the cemetery of death. The white bone staff had the effect of amplifying necromancy magic. Although its use was different from the Eye of Darkness, they were both necromancy magic items. Han Shuo held the two items in his hands and compared them, trying to see if there was anything in common. Looking at the two items in his hands, Han Shuo couldn't help but gather his mental strength. The Eye of Darkness suddenly flashed, and a green light suddenly shone brightly. A wave of power invaded the white bone staff, and a strand of black light suddenly shot out from the white bone staff, instantly entering the Eye of Darkness. Startled, Han Shuo ignored the Eye of Darkness and completely focused his mental strength, invading the white bone staff. Han Shuo hadn't felt anything out of the ordinary when his mental strength entered the white bone staff, but he suddenly discovered that there was a small, mysterious magical matrix within the staff. It's a magical brand boundary. No wonder Belinda could sense the white bone staff. Han Shuo's mental strength circled the white bone staff and immediately understood. In Clarendon's memories, there was a magical brand boundary that could exist on weapons and clothes, usually in the form of a magical matrix. Within a certain distance, the owner of the magical brand would be able to sense the existence of the magical brand through their own methods. It turned out that there was such a magical brand boundary within the white bone staff. Not only had the presence of magical elements obstructed Han Shuo's mental strength from the beginning, but it was also because of the residual magical elements that Belinda had sensed the existence of the white bone staff. Perhaps it was the effects of the Eye of Darkness that had absorbed the magical elements within the white bone staff. Without the support of the magical elements, the transportation matrix within the white bone staff could no longer be maintained. This was why Han Shuo was able to spy on the situation within. Han Shuo's mental strength entered the staff and spied a circle around the magical matrix. He discovered a line of small words, Alchemist Belinda of the Calamity Church, Opus 17. It's from the Calamity Church, all right, Han Shuo exclaimed lowly and didn't continue to stay in the cemetery of death. He got up and returned to the hotel through the transportation matrix, planning on how to deal with Belinda. Chapter 165. From the transportation matrix to the cupboard, Han Shuo already felt that something was amiss before he even opened the cupboard's door. First, a faint fragrance entered Han Shuo's nose and mouth. A strong wave of dizziness suddenly assaulted him, and Han Shuo almost fainted in that instant. It was a good thing that Han Shuo's body was far more resilient than the average person after having been tempered by demonic magic, and the magical yuan had even more miraculous effects. When Han Shuo inhaled that faint fragrance into his abdomen, Han Shuo's body automatically circulated the magical yuan as soon as he felt the dizziness. The scent that had entered his abdomen was expelled from his body in the blink of an eye under the effect of the magical yuan. The dizziness that had occurred in that instant also disappeared. At this moment, Han Shuo held his breath and circulated the magical yuan in his body, then inhaled another breath of that fragrance. As soon as the scent entered his mouth, Han Shuo's tenacious nerves had long since prepared themselves for it. The feeling of dizziness appeared for a moment, but under the effects of the magical yuan and Han Shuo's strong willpower, the feeling of drowsiness turned from intense to mild, until it seemed to have no effect at all. Having reached the true demon realm in demonic magic, Han Shuo's body had been tempered beyond imagination. Even such a strong fragrance couldn't affect Han Shuo's movements. Not good. I wonder how Emily is. After his perverted body had adapted to the effects of the fragrance, Han Shuo suddenly thought of Emily in the room and hastily pushed open the cupboard in shock. Emily, who should have been in the room, had disappeared without a trace. He didn't know where she had gone. There were traces of rummaging in the room, and from the degree of disorder, it seemed that someone had been here. The transportation matrix that Han Shuo had set up was inside the cupboard, and the top of the magical wand had been covered by Han Shuo's clothes beforehand. Therefore, even if someone came to open the cupboard, they wouldn't be able to discover anything unless they looked carefully. As soon as he saw that the room had been turned over, and that Emily had disappeared, Han Shuo immediately became nervous. Just as Han Shuo was about to walk out of the room and look for Elaine, he suddenly realized that something was wrong with the entire hotel. Opening a corner of the window, Han Shuo found that it was already nighttime. However, looking into the distance, he could see that the houses in the distance were brightly lit, which meant that it was not yet late at night. But in this hotel, all the rooms were shrouded in darkness. Only Belinda's room seemed to have a faint light, and the faint sounds of conversation could be heard. While Han Shuo was holding his breath and concentrating, he discovered that there was a flying insect the size of a fly in the hotel's courtyard. There were a few dozen of these flying insects, and they scattered and flew around the various rooms of the hotel. Their tails exuded a grayish-brown gas. That was the same scent that had almost made Han Shuo fall asleep. Frowning, Han Shuo was almost certain that the strange changes in the hotel had something to do with Belinda. Silently opening the door, Han Shuo took out the black robes that members of the Dark Mantle wore during their operations and wrapped them around his body. He scuttled up to the roof in the darkness and slowly made his way to Belinda's room. As he did this, Han Shuo used magical yuan to conceal all of his presence with great familiarity. His heartbeat and breathing also adjusted to a very hard-to-detect frequency. Madam Belinda, all of the guests in this hotel have been gathered in the living room of this room. As soon as he arrived in Belinda's room and pressed his ear to it, Han Shuo heard a low voice coming from below. Belinda responded softly from inside and seemed to be walking towards the living room. Han Shuo carefully and lightly moved his body. When he arrived at the main hall, he lightly extended a finger and circulated the mystical glacial spellfire. A small flame rose from his finger and pierced through a wooden structure. He then peered down at the bottom of the hall. In a living room similar to Han Shuo's room, there were a dozen or so people who'd fainted from the drug. Among them were Emily, whom Han Shuo had been very worried about, Chester, who'd returned from sending Lisa to Lawrence, and the owner of the hotel, Elaine. Even Candace and the other members of the Battlefire mercenary band who'd been protecting Belinda were all unconscious. Apart from these people that Han Shuo was familiar with, there was also the great druid Caspian and the female elf Angelica. Han Shuo had met these two last time in the Dark Forest. He'd met the two separately then, but now that he saw them together, Han Shuo realized that the two were on the same side. The remaining guests didn't have any special characters and were likely here to do business in Valence City. They didn't attract Han Shua's attention. The three people who'd been tailing Belinda were now standing there with respectful expressions, as if they were subordinates awaiting Belinda's orders. This surprised Han Shua. He hadn't thought that these three people would be Belinda's people. Belinda's slender eyebrows were furrowed tightly when she arrived in the living room. She swept a glance at the people below and said softly, "I sensed activity from the number 17 bone staff when I arrived at the hotel. I'd personally refined that staff and awarded it to Clarendon as a reward. However, when I followed my senses to the hallway, the presence of the staff suddenly disappeared. It looks like someone must have suddenly stored it in a space ring." None of the guests have left the hotel since I've entered, so I can be sure that the staff is in one of their space rings. My lord, what should we do? The eldest of the three brothers who were standing there respectfully asked Belinda. Belinda's sapphire eyes scanned the people on the ground and then pointed at Emily. The white bone staff should be on her. The only ones on the ground who had space rings were Emily, Candace, Caspian, and Angelica. Candace had been with them the entire time, so it was naturally impossible for her to have the staff. When Han Shua hadn't entered the Cemetery of Death, the Great Druid and Angelica hadn't appeared in the hotel yet. In Belinda's eyes, Emily was the only one with the white bone staff. The one who had asked the question walked to Emily's side after Belinda's words and took off Emily's space ring, handing it to Belinda respectfully. Belinda took Emily's space ring and closed her eyes to feel it, saying, "She's set up a magical boundary inside. Tie her up first and then wake her up." My lord, what about the others? It was still the eldest of the three brothers who asked. Waving her hand, Belinda said casually, "Same old rules. Those who have no value are to be dealt with immediately." Han Shua immediately grew nervous when he heard these words. Apart from Emily, there were three familiar faces in the hall below: Candace, Angelica, and Caspian. Caspian had no connection to Han Shua, but Candace and the little elf Angelica had some connection to Han Shua. Han Shua couldn't just watch the two girls be killed like this. "Don't you think your methods are a bit overboard?" Caspian, who should have been unconscious, suddenly spoke before Han Shua could make a move. Caspian rose from his lying position as he spoke and shielded the little elf Angelica behind him. Han Shua had been about to immediately make a move, but he immediately stopped when he saw this sudden change. He continued to lie on the roof and observe the activity below. You're still able to remain conscious even under the effects of my powerful knockout powder. It looks like the great druids do have some miraculous powers." Belinda exclaimed softly in surprise and said calmly, "I don't care who you are, but your methods greatly disgust me. As long as you let everyone here go, I won't hold it against you for the harm you've done to us earlier and will let you leave." Caspian looked at Belinda with some displeasure and snorted, "Farika, you three brothers can take a look at just what miraculous powers a great druid of the Druidic Order has. Kill him for me." Belinda didn't waste any words when she heard Caspian's words and immediately waved her hand, indicating for the three brothers to kill Caspian. Farika and his brothers looked at each other under Belinda's orders, dark killing intent appearing on their faces. They each took out 3 long swords and surrounded Caspian. "Since you won't listen to my advice, then don't blame me." Chapter 166. Up on the roof, Han Shua could clearly see the changes happening below through a long and narrow crack. The flying bugs the size of flies had gathered in this room from within the hotel, all of them congregating around Belinda. The soft branches of the surrounding trees spread madly in all directions after landing in the room. Great Druid Caspian of the Druidic Order held a staff that looked like a tree root, exuding a strong life force. "What are you waiting for?" Belinda suddenly snorted lightly at this moment. Farika and his brothers, who had surrounded Caspian, attacked Caspian almost simultaneously as soon as Belinda's words sounded out. The tip of Farika's longsword suddenly shot out crackling lightning after the three of them made their moves. One of the other two's longswords whistled through the air with extreme speed, while the last one ignited with raging flames and swept towards Caspian. Han Shuo, who was on the roof, was immediately taken aback by the three's actions. Han Shuo immediately identified Farika and his brothers from the changes in their longswords. They were actually magic swordsmen who trained in both martial arts and magic. Farika should have also trained in thunder magic, while the other two trained in wind and fire magic, respectively. The three longswords looked like they'd been forged in a special way. They could directly imbue thunder, fire, and wind magic into their longswords when they attacked, increasing the power and speed of their techniques. This was quite a deterrent. It's three magic swordsmen. No wonder you're so arrogant. Caspian suddenly snorted coldly when they attacked, and when he opened his mouth to speak, he was still waving the magic staff in his hand. The snake-like branches that had been madly spreading through the room really did seem like long, flexible snakes. Dozens of branches lashed out at Farika and his brothers like long whips. At the same time, Caspian took a step back and picked up the unconscious Angelica. He suddenly leapt out of the window and landed on a nearby tree. The twining branches were shockingly nimble under Caspian's control. They seemed to know martial arts and could even dodge the slashes of the three magic swords. Caspian retreated to the top of the tree, a benevolent expression on his face as he raised his root-like magic staff and chanted a spell. The tree he was standing on suddenly came to life like a giant octopus. The lush branches suddenly became like countless tentacles of the octopus. With a very fast speed, they all spread into the house and swept towards everyone inside. Rise! A low cry came from Caspian's mouth. With a loud rumble, the house that Belinda and the others were in suddenly uprooted from the ground. Then, with a loud rumble, the beams of the house collapsed. Han Shuo, who was lying on the floor, stared at Emily in the room. He planned to rush down and rescue Emily if anything went wrong. However, what comforted Han Shuo was that the countless soft branches that had spread into the house had already entangled everyone apart from Belinda's group of 4 under Caspian's control. When the house collapsed, the soft, snake-like branches had already carried all the people who'd fainted from Belinda's sleeping powder out of the room. Friend on the roof, it's time for you to come down? When Han Shuo discovered that Emily had been pulled out of the house by the soft branches and was about to take the opportunity to leave, Caspian's bright eyes fell on Han Shuo and he spoke with a slight smile. Seeing that he'd been exposed, Han Shuo didn't continue to hide. He leapt out of the collapsed room and landed in the spacious courtyard of the hotel. He then walked easily to the large tree that Caspian was in and stood next to Emily and Candace. Do what you need to do. I'll keep an eye on these people for you. I won't let them harm the people under the tree. Han Shuo looked up at Caspian in the sky and smiled faintly. Caspian was taken aback when he heard Han Shuo's words. He couldn't help but look at Han Shuo oddly, asking in surprise, "Have we met before? Why does your voice sound so familiar?" Heh, send those people away first. Belinda and the other 3 suddenly rushed out of the collapsed house at this moment. They immediately glared angrily at Caspian and attacked him. All right, I think I'll definitely recognize you. Caspian responded and waved the magic staff that looked like the roots of a tree, treating Farika and his brothers with a face full of caution. The lush branches of the large tree above their heads continuously entangled, appearing abnormally large and powerful. The other trees in the courtyard seemed to be drawn by the power of nature and also began to wave their branches, joining in with Caspian's team. Han Shuo was quite surprised to see this. Han Shuo raised his head and saw that Caspian seemed to be able to deal with these people. He lowered his head and turned his attention to the unconscious Emily. Taking a deep breath, Han Shuo put a hand on Emily's back and circulated his magical yuan, forming a small whirlpool in his left palm. Han Shuo calmed his mind and used the wonders of the magical yuan and Han Shuo's understanding of the body to expel the sleeping fragrance that Emily had inhaled from her body in a short amount of time. Her long eyelashes suddenly fluttered, and Han Shuo was overjoyed. He knew that Emily was about to wake up. An enormous roar suddenly sounded in Han Shuo's ears, and the startled Han Shuo jerked his head up to discover that a 4 to 5 meter tall, 3-eyed monster had appeared in the courtyard. It had 8 horns on its head and a barbed tail covered in spikes. Han Shuo recognized this 4 to 5 meter tall three-eyed monster with just one look. It was the appearance of the three-eyed demon god, Ansidezi, that necromancer Clarendon had tried to summon last time. Right now, this three-eyed evil godlike monster was covered in shining grayish-brown iron armor. Its huge body was filled with power, giving off a strong sense of deterrence. A golem in the shape of an evil god. You're from the Calamity Church? Caspian's expression changed greatly when he saw the golem that looked like Ansidezi appear, and he cried out in shock. You've guessed correctly, Belinda said softly and pointed at Caspian, instructing the golem, kill him. The 4 to 5 meter tall golem, made from gray metal armor, charged directly at Caspian under Belinda's orders. A large tree in the surroundings furiously sprouted branches to wrap around the golem's ankles. However, before the branches could completely wrap around the golem's ankles, the extremely valiant-looking golem suddenly exerted force and broke the soft branches that had wrapped around its ankles. With each step, the three-eyed evil godlike puppet beast stomped heavily on the ground, creating a loud rumbling sound, as if an earthquake was approaching. Many slender branches from a nearby tree twisted together, turning into a branch that was thicker than two people's waists and fiercely smashed towards the golem. When the golem saw that the attack was upon it, its barbed tail covered in spikes swept out and slammed into the thick branch with a bang. The originally ferocious branch was struck by the golem's armored tail, and the barbs on its tail pierced deeply into the tree trunk. The thick branch was also broken off from the tree with a violent flick of the golem's arm, and then broke into a pile of broken branches that fell to the ground. A series of profound magical incantations suddenly came out of Emily's mouth, and a few dark magic spells suddenly fell on the golem. However, the dark magic spells that were highly destructive to humans and beasts didn't have any effect on the golem. The golems in the shape of evil gods that the Calamity Church's alchemists have developed all have strong magic immunity. Don't waste your efforts. Caspian looked down at Emily and reminded her. What do we do? Emily looked up at Caspian and asked urgently. Take these innocent people and leave immediately. I'll think of a way to tie them down. Caspian was also very anxious as he looked down and immediately responded. The golem is being manipulated by someone. As long as we can restrain the manipulator, everything will be over. Han Shuo suddenly said coldly at this moment. That is indeed the case, but that woman has 3 magical swordsmen protecting her, and the golem is also attacking us. It's not very realistic to restrain her. The golem in the shape of the three-eyed demon god had already arrived as they spoke. Caspian waved his magic staff as he spoke, manipulating the tree beneath him to intercept the golem. Emily, protect the people under the tree. Caspian, intercept the golem. Leave the woman to me. Han Shuo snorted coldly and rushed over like lightning as soon as the words left his mouth. His target was the female alchemist Belinda in the middle of the 3 magical swordsmen. Chapter 167. Careful, Emily called out worriedly when she saw Han Shuo rush out. The hotel's courtyard was the size of a basketball court. With Han Shuo's swift speed, he'd already appeared in the corner where Belinda and the others were standing almost as soon as Emily spoke. But as soon as Han Shuo moved, Farika and his brothers understood Han Shuo's intentions and had already surrounded Belinda, who was controlling the golem, in the center. Farika and his brothers surrounded Belinda from 3 different directions. All 6 eyes focused on Han Shuo's body warily. They gripped their magical swords tightly in their hands as they waited for Han Shuo to arrive. Han Shuo chanted the dark mist spell in a low voice as he charged forward. When Han Shuo appeared next to the 4, the dark mist spell was immediately released, enveloping Han Shuo, Belinda, and the others within. Damn it! He's a necromancer. Farika cursed. The magic sword in his hand suddenly shot out glaring lightning, illuminating the dark surroundings so that they could see clearly. 2 zombie warriors and Little Skull with the bone dagger suddenly appeared in the dark mist at Han Shuo's summons. Under Han Shuo's incantation, the The two zombie warriors and Little Skull attacked Farika and his brothers at the same time. Even with the illumination of the lightning, the area covered by the dark mist couldn't be seen clearly, especially now that it was the middle of the night. As the caster, Han Shua hid in the darkness and paced back and forth around Farika and his brothers like a ghost. He wasn't in a hurry to immediately attack. The two zombie warriors were immediately dealt a devastating blow when they neared Farika and his brothers. The person with the fire magical sword chopped away a zombie warrior's wooden club with the scorching heat of his sword, and the zombie warrior was instantly engulfed in flames. As for the swordsman who had mastered wind magic, his body was very agile. The speed at which he swung his magic sword was so fast that it was dazzling. In the blink of an eye, a dozen swords had already landed on the other zombie warrior's body. In an extremely short period of time, that zombie warrior had also lost the ability to fight. At the same time, two bone spears pierced through the air, aiming straight for the elder Farika. Little Skull also brandished his bone knife and stabbed at Farika. To Farika, the bone spears were obviously more of a threat than the Little Skull wielding the bone knife. As soon as he heard the sound of the bone spears, he immediately focused all his attention on the direction of the sound and struck out with his sword. A bolt of lightning flashed through the darkness, and the two bone spears were both struck down. Suddenly, the Little Skull that had been moving as sluggishly as a normal skeletal warrior suddenly shot out with shocking speed, the bone dagger stabbing towards Farika's chest. Be careful. Belinda had been manipulating the golem on the side and immediately screamed out in warning when she suddenly discovered the abnormality. Farika started in fright and tried to block again, but it was already too late. He immediately dodged in a flurry, but a large chunk of flesh had still been sliced through his chest. He grimaced in pain. The Demon's Lair Edge's shrill howl suddenly sounded. The Demon's Lair Edge revealed a hair-raising red in the darkness as it quickly wove through Farika's three brothers. Two soft sounds rang out, like the sound of a stick piercing through wallpaper. The other two, who just finished off the two zombie warriors, didn't know what was going on when they suddenly felt a chill in their chests. They looked down and saw a bloody hole in their chests, fresh blood spurting out like arrows. Two thuds sounded out as the two who'd looked down to see the bloody hole in their chests fell to the ground with a thud. On the other side, Caspian had been in a bit of a dangerous situation due to Belinda's distraction when he discovered that the golem's movements had suddenly slowed down. He immediately waved his staff and once again wrapped the tree branches around the golem. Under the tree, Emily took out her magic staff as her gaze moved back and forth between the golem and Han Shua, seeming to observe the danger on the other side. Don't kill her. It's best if you capture her. The Demon's Lair Edge's shrill howl became more and more piercing after being stained with the blood of the two magical swordsmen. In the distance, Emily couldn't help but exclaim softly when she saw a wisp of red swimming through the darkness towards Belinda, as if it was going to kill her next time. If it wasn't for Emily's reminder, the Demon's Lair Edge would have reaped Belinda's life in the next moment. Han Shua immediately understood Belinda's intentions when he heard Emily's soft exclamation. With a thought, the Demon's Lair Edge flew back and landed in his hand in the blink of an eye. Farika, who'd escaped one of Little Skull's bone daggers, was in great pain from the stabbing pain in his chest. However, this pain was only temporary. Just as he dodged, the 7 blood-red bone spurs on Little Skull's back suddenly shot out and nailed him to the ground. The 7 blood-red bone spurs sparkled with an eerie red light as the blood on Farika's body quickly flowed into the 7 bone spurs. All of Farika's blood had been sucked away by the 7 bone spurs in an exceedingly short amount of time. His body shriveled up like a large piece of dried meat. As the 7 bone spurs sucked away his blood, Little Skull seemed to be enjoying it immensely. He held the bone dagger in his hand and danced with joy, making Belinda feel an irrepressible sense of fear. Don't move. Belinda suddenly heard a cold, harsh voice from behind her in the darkness. She then saw the strange weapon that had reaped the lives of 2 of her subordinates pressed against her neck. Who are you, that you dare interfere in the matters of the Calamity Church? Belinda didn't reveal any signs of panic as her sapphire eyes looked straight ahead. Her tone was still gentle as she spoke faintly. Cut the crap and stop the golem's movements immediately, or you'll die right now. Clarendon had already been killed, and it was certain that Han Shuo and the Calamity Church had formed a grudge. Han Shuo was now completely lawless and unrestrained in his actions. Why would he care about the Calamity Church's threats? Belinda felt that Han Shuo wasn't joking at all from his cold tone and the killing intent emanating from the demon's lair edge. After muttering to herself for a moment, Belinda said, "You'll definitely regret provoking us." Belinda controlled the golem with some unknown method as she spoke. The 4 to 5 meter tall armored golem actually disappeared into a strange magic scroll in Belinda's hand. Han Shuo used a bit of force to hit the back of Belinda's head, causing her body to go limp, and she immediately fainted. The little skull's 7 bone spurs had drained all the blood from Farika's body and returned them to Farika's spine. The dark mist was gradually thinning at this point. Han Shuo saw that the outcome was set and also withdrew the little skull. Taking a deep breath, Han Shuo grabbed Belinda by the waist and clamped her between his wrists, walking out of the area to Emily's side. "Let's go. I'll leave the rest to Elder Caspian." Han Shuo lifted his head to look at Caspian and laughed lightly. Since the golem had disappeared, Caspian naturally had no more misgivings. He looked at Han Shuo with great surprise when he heard Han Shuo's words. "Just who are you? How do you know I'm called Caspian? Have we met before?" "Heh, we have indeed met before, but we're not familiar with each other." The people here are all innocent. They have only been drugged by the incense. Even without your help, they will slowly wake up. We need to take this person from the Calamity Church away for questioning, so we won't be staying here any longer." Han Shuo smiled as he looked at Caspian. "No, this woman is from the Calamity Church. If today's matters aren't handled well, it'll bring you great trouble. I think it's more appropriate for you to hand her over to me. I'll take care of this matter." Caspian seemed a bit unwilling when he heard that Han Shuo and Caspian wanted to take Belinda away. He landed from the tree and spoke to Han Shuo. "Our Dark Mantle has already interfered with the matters of the Calamity Church. It's not your place to ask." Emily, who'd been silent all this time, suddenly looked at Caspian with displeasure and said with a scowl. Caspian started when he heard these words and then nodded in realization. "So you're from the Dark Mantle. Since that's the case, then there's no problem. You can take the woman away. I'll guarantee the safety of everyone here." "Then I'll thank you very much." Han Shuo was picking up Farika and the other two's magic swords as he spoke, and also looting the items on their bodies. "Let's go. Don't look anymore. There's nothing left." Emily rolled her eyes at Han Shuo, seemingly amused at Han Shuo's greed. "If this woman wakes up, explain to her what happened so she doesn't become overly suspicious." Han Shuo pointed at Candace on the ground and left with Emily, returning to the Dark Mantle stronghold. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.